population continued to decline to a low of only 702 nests worldwide for 1985. A project was started as a safeguard against extinction, so that if a political or environmental catastrophe occurred at Rancho Nuevo, there'd be a safe area in the U.S. where Kemp's Release could nest and be protected. From 1978 to 1988, 22,507 Kemp's Release sea turtle eggs were brought to Padre Isle National Seashore for incubation in an attempt to establish a secondary nesting colony, because Kemp's Ridley is a native nester to South Texas. What we tried to do was to imprint the turtles to Padre Isle National Seashore. The hatchlings were released on the beach, allowed to crawl into the surf, where they were recaptured using aquarium dip nets. Then the hatchlings were sent to the National Marine Fisheries Service Laboratory in Galveston, Texas, where they were raised for approximately 9 to 11 months. And that allowed the turtles to grow to a size large enough so that they could be tagged for future recognition, and also to be able to avoid most predators when they were released.
And that's a big turtle. It's about 3 feet long.
And it took a full 10 years before we found our first confirmed returnee from that project. And it was an extremely happy day.
Look at her.
We knew that these turtles were from the project because they had on them living tags.
A living tag is like a skin graft where there was a piece of the bottom shell taken out, a piece of the top shell, and that small plug from the bottom shell was glued into the surrounding shell surface on the top, providing a permanent light identification marker on the darker background.
Thank you. Darren, do we have enough for quorum to start the meeting?
No, pursuant to our charter, it requires 4 council members and the mayor, or at least 5 council members. So currently we are 1 member shy to constitute a quorum, so we could not open the meeting at this time.
All right, we will wait until our next council member shows up. Our budget discussion workshop. Call the meeting to order at 8:34 a.m. Did we end up with any citizen comments?
There are no citizen comment forms submitted today.
All right, no citizen comments. All right, then we'll start off with the staff action plan and recommendations for the 2023 strategic priorities. Trent, will you take it away, please?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, and good morning, Council. Thank you for joining us on this Saturday morning, and all of our staff that's here as well. It's an important day, and we're going to first kick that off with just a brief update on our strategic priorities and milestone action plan. So I'll be brief. We did provide you a memo with an outline of the plan. And then how we're going to talk a little bit about how we put that plan together, and then how those priorities and milestones influence the FY24 budget we'll be talking about this morning. And then we do have a few items that require some future clarification or some additional clarification. We're going to present those, but we're not going to sit we're not expecting that we clarify those this morning. We plan on coming back and having a meeting later this fall to walk through those items. Just to back up where we started with in February with our strategic visioning retreat, the council went through that process, developed or confirmed the strategic priorities, developed milestones to go along with those. Those milestones were intended to provide some additional direction and specific things underneath each of those milestones that the council wanted to see accomplished and put a time frame to those. So on March 27th, the council adopted the updated strategic priorities as well as those milestones. Since then, our staff's been working diligently through those milestones to put together more detail to those, more timelines to those, and tasks and objectives associated with each of those. So we had a group with Josh Lee, Megan Flowers Phillips, Eric Hammond, and Kelly Sears work with all the departments to go through those and put those together. So they worked for several weeks on that, developing those. What we see out of this is that this really kind of builds organizational clarity from the city council's strategic priorities down through these milestones to the goals and the priorities of each department and division and even individuals within the city organization. So they see what they do on a day-to-day basis and what they're charged with doing as a division and departments and how they tie back to the city council strategic priorities. So the action plan includes timeframes, assignments, metrics, and then we'll have a tracking mechanism to report progress on that as we move forward as well. So just some of the impacts on this particular budget that are coming out of the milestones. In trusted government and accessible communication, we've got $30,000 in there to start developing the business plan for a 311 type call center, or for me, it's really the holistic customer service look at how we serve our customers, and that we do that intentionally, we do that accurately, we do that consistently across all of our divisions and departments, and we do that as one whole city. The next one's under strong economy. We have the Old Town Master Plan update. So in the EDC's budget, we've got a plan to update the Old Town Master Plan, and then the UDC updates that we did not do in last year's budget. We had to remove. We've got those back in the budget this year. And then under Safe Community, we had one of the milestones was look at the effectiveness and the responsiveness of fire and police to evaluate that. We talked about that at a previous meeting, that after talking to the departments, that really boils down to wanting to look at our dispatching services. And since we contract that out for the fire department and we do it in-house for the police department, but there's still a lot of overlap and a lot of things that go together there. So we've got $80,000 in the budget to hire a consultant to help us evaluate our current operations and provide guidance and recommendations and a business plan for long-term improvements there, and a long-term plan to potentially move that all into one internal dispatching service. And then we have 2 police officers and the associated equipment in the budget for Safe Community. And continuing with Safe Community, we've got some additional emergency management training and drills. So the ICS 305 all hazards training, we've done this in the past. We've got money in the budget to bring that actually here to do that. So we have additional folks trained up and proficient with the ICS planning process. And then heavy apparatus for the fire department. We've got 2 pumpers and a ladder truck in this budget to replace some of our aging equipment in the fire department. And then under sustainable infrastructure, we've got phase 2 of the generator enclosure heaters. So coming out of the Winter Storm Uri, we had a recommendation on improvements to all of our generators that support our buildings as well as our utilities. And one of the recommendations was that we install enclosure heaters in all of those generators. We were able to fund a portion of those in last year's budget. This funds the balance of those, so we can complete all those recommendations out of that generator assessment plan. So that's how these influence this year's budget, and we'll reiterate those as we go through the budget. But then there were a few things that came out of the milestones where As we work through those, we believe require some additional conversation, some additional clarification with the council. And one of those is interconnected historical data for 3 years. And that was, we're seeking additional input to just clarify the intent before we start outlining any additional metrics or timeframes for that one. And then an annual regional event held in Pearland. So we want to have a conversation over the type of, or the purpose of that event and the type of event, because in working with the Parks Department, it really depends on which way we want to go, is which type of organizer that we want to bring on board to help us with that. Kind of high level, you know, there's tourism centric type events, or are we looking for something much more locally themed? And then the last one is just, you know, we had a lot of discussion on whole community at the last strategic retreat. So just reviewing that topic, seeking direction on the future of that strategic priority, and gain some clarity on the desired impact to our community through our current and future efforts that because we have a lot of those things that we do and a lot of those efforts that do fall under whole community. So not looking for any clarification today, but just wanted to put that seed in your mind, so when we have those conversations, we can gain some better clarity on those few items that we didn't have when we put the memo out. So we do plan on coming back at some point this fall to have those conversations, and then we'll bring back basically that milestone report, and just get council to pass a resolution saying, yeah, we're heading in the right direction with those. And then that'll establish what we track moving forward. And then, of course, moving beyond that, we'll review and evaluate these at every annual retreat as we move forward, with the next one being in February of '24. So that is just a quick update on where we are on our strategic priorities and the milestones. And if there's any questions, we'd be happy to answer those. If not, we're ready to move on to the next portion of this morning's meeting.
Thank you, Trent. Any questions or comments from council? All right, with that, I did forget to certify that we did have a quorum, so we do have a quorum here with everyone present, with the exception of Mayor Cole, Member Cam Carr, and Member Hernandez. So I forgot to do that, so I just wanted to tie that back up. And then we'll move on to our second discussion item here. We've got staff presentation and independent audit regarding the city's tax calculation process. Trent, if you'd take that, please.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. So since we had the presentation from SGR on their audit, and we went through their best practices there, we've provided, I believe we've provided an update on that, a written update on that, but leading into the budget, we wanted to provide where we are on that today, because we think that really, you know, it's important to understand that and the things we've done to prepare and be ready to make sure going through the worksheet and everything that goes into this budget has been, you know, done in light of these recommendations. So I'm going to hand it over to our CFO, Amy Buckert, to walk us through where we are on the recommendations.
Thank you, sir. I wanted to start off with saying that we did give an update on this to the audit committee early last month. So it has been updated for a few action items since that time. The first recommendation was to contract with a company, a third party, to perform the calculations moving forward, which helps ensure the accuracy and how the numbers are calculated. In April, the city entered an agreement with Assessments of the Southwest to help us with those calculations. They're the ones who also do a lot of MUD tax calculations and TERS tax calculations. And then the recommendation, the next one was training a minimum of 2 City of Pearland finance staff members in the requirements and calculations set forth in Senate Bill 2 from the 2019 legislature. That's ongoing. And this year, the city manager and myself were the ones who worked on the worksheet in parallel with Assessments of the Southwest. We also reviewed it in detail with Brazoria County. In the future years, we've identified myself, the Deputy Director, Kendra Murphy, the Budget Officer, Rachel Winslow, and the Controller, Tanisha. And then also I've joined the Tax Association of Assessing Officers last month. We have another recommendation that all staff, or that staff should attend all county appraisal districts meetings in the April timeframe when those preliminary values come out. So we did attend Brazoria County in April. Harris County held theirs the same day. So next year we'll need to send 3 staff members, 1 to each county, to make sure that we have them all covered. And we do have calendar updates or calendar meeting dates on our calendars so that we can start attending those meetings and receiving the updating information. We'll probably each take a county and attend the meetings. Compare the current year to the previous year's numbers, and when the numbers do not appear correct, to ask questions of the tax assessor and the county appraisal districts. We did that. We compared all the calculations and results in the worksheet to multiple past years, and we developed a spreadsheet that replicates the worksheet with very specific notes so we can locate the input data and know how to fill it out for next year. And then compare the Brazoria County tax assessor information from July to the final certified rule that comes out in August from Harris County. That will be ongoing. We're hoping to get it at the end of August. We did review the last 3 years of the HCAD history and adjusted our tax worksheet accordingly to the collections on that. So historical data was used to adjust those uncertified estimates based on what we've done in the past since Senate Bill 2 passed. Establish a dedicated contact with someone other than the tax assessor collectors for all the districts. We did that. That was effective in June. Conduct an organizational study of the finance department. That is being done. We added that to the scope of the 65th North Group study that was already being done on internal controls and vulnerability assessments. And that report is pending delivery. Finance staff should receive and read the county appraisal district's monthly updates. There's a commitment from Harris County to send the city of Pearland these updates, and we are reviewing and saving all information from those appraisal districts. The city should receive all preliminary rolls, updates, and the final certified roll to monitor changes. HCAD's committed to sending the certified estimate and the certified final roll directly to the city, and it's recommended that all these appraisal districts send them to us for review. That's ongoing. To date, the basic rolls from each of the 3 counties have been received. HCAD and BCAD provided certified estimates. Fort Bend provided certified roll. Harris County would not grant us access to their FTP site to download the files because we're not the tax assessor collector, but they did provide documents when we requested them from them. Communicate with the Brazoria County tax assessor and the county appraisal districts and press the issue if the numbers do not appear to be correct. We did hold, the city manager and I did hold a number of phone calls and emails with them during the process over the last few weeks to set that tax rate worksheet. They were helpful in answering our questions. Those are the recommendations and our status on those. Are there any questions from council?
Thank you, Amy. Any questions, comments from council?
Amy, hey Amy, so why is it that we're not allowed the VPN access? I mean, I understand that the tax appraiser collector is the one that needs to be able to get this information, but why are we dependent on them sending it to the tax appraiser and then we having to get it from the tax appraiser collector?
I'm not sure if that's an internal policy. We did go directly to the chief appraiser with that question.
They did send us the information directly as well after we made that request.
After we requested it.
Yeah, they did send it to us directly, but they still wouldn't allow us directly into the FTP site for the raw documents. They've got some internal policy that says that if you're not a tax assessor collector, you can't have access to that. So we're going to continue to work on that. I think as long as they're sending us the information direct, we're still getting the information that's needed, whether we get into the FTP site or not.
I realize this process is relatively new for us, so I know it's a work in progress, but did we establish a procedure, an internal procedure on, timing as it relates to, feature function milestones of this process so that any replacement person, a new controller or whomever that's, the person handling this data can actually reflect back to say, okay, this is my policy and procedure on how to handle this
So
this task.
are you referring specifically to how do you take all that information from the CADs and put it into the worksheet?
Correct.
So as we developed our own worksheet internally, every line that's in there references where you find that document, you know, and the specific file, the specific, you know, line. You pull data from probably, I don't know, 30 plus different places, it feels like. And so we were very, very diligent as we went through that is where did that come from? Okay, it came from this document. That document is named this, and it comes from this particular page or this particular line. And some of them are even more complex than that. You have to go pull certain lines out of basically a report, and the report has all kinds of stuff in it. And you have to go pull out the 65 and over and the disability exemption lines only. So we've got very specific notes on each of those. You know, there's some things where you get the number from here, but then you take 90% of that number, and that's something that's just not written anywhere. It's you know, that's from having conversations with the tax assessor collector. It's as Amy mentioned, going back through the historical data of Harris County, saying, okay, from uncertified to certified, how much of the, you know, of the value of the uncertified piece of that are we realizing each year? You know, where Brazoria County's recommended 90% on what they're doing and recommended 90% on HCAD. We went back and looked at our historical data and went with 88% based on, for Harris County, based on the historical data. So, you know, could somebody just jump in there with no knowledge of anything and replicate it? Probably not, but somebody that has some familiarity with the documents, has some familiarity with the way the state worksheet works, I think they could go in there and replicate what we did very easily.
So are we running our own parallel rate worksheet in parallel with assessments of the Southwest, or?
We ran it in its entirety and sent it over to Assessments of the Southwest. They validated it and signed it and certified it. So they were running in parallel with us. I'd say we got ours done and sent it to them for them to take a look at before we saw a final version out of them.
Before they got it, okay.
Yeah. And that included, as Amy mentioned, working with the Brazoria County Tax Assessor Collector, basically running, having them go through everything we did. And then we had a conference call afterwards, and there was 3 or 4 of the, you know, 100 and something places you put information in where we were pulling something from a different place, or needed, you know, to tweak a number like by the 90% or something like that. So she walked us through 3 or 4 places where she saw that, you know, we didn't have it exactly right. So I think, you know, we got those areas correct. Everything else looked to be right from her perspective. And of course we, you know, checked and double checked all the things that caused some of the issues last year. I feel comfortable with the sheet. We've been through it back and forth multiple times. And then as far as into the future, you know, Amy mentioned herself and I were kind of point this year and going through everything, and then we've identified other folks to get trained up on that. So some of the difficulty in not having that done at this point is the training for tax assessor collectors. It's a whole program. It's like a multi-year program that they go through for their certifications, and it's multiple classes, and so it goes so far beyond the scope of anything really related to our tax worksheet or what we do. So what we've looked into is that by joining some of these organizations, we can pull out the specific classes that are really applicable to what we do here. There's 2 of them that we've identified, and then all the organizations that do their courses on those all occurred early in this year. So before we would have had a chance to join those organizations and be a part of that training. So we're awaiting their calendar year 24 training schedules so that we can get our folks into those training classes. And like Amy said, we'll have at least 4 people going through that, so we do have some redundancy, and so I'll feel better when somebody else internally can check my math too. So, so I think we got a good plan in place there.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions? Member Carbone?
If you go back to slide 2, I guess when I hear that we're running calculations in parallel, I would assume that if me and Koza are running something, we're going to run it completely parallel, see what our answer is, check our answer, and if they're different, figure out why we're off. Sounds like we ran it, beat Southwest assessments of the Southwest to the punch, and then sent them our work, and they checked it. And is that what happened?
It was a little more iterative than that. So they started, we were exchanging worksheets and then going back and forth going, okay, we don't have the same number on this one. Where'd you get this number? And because there's so many numbers, it's a little more piecemeal than just do everything and see if we both wind up with no new revenue and voter approve rate that's the same. It's, kind of go through each line. So they did an initial run, we did an initial run. We started going through those back and forth to say, okay, we don't match here. We got it from here. Where'd you get it from? Which one's right? And then we worked through some of those differences. And then, as they were working as well. And then that's when, we got to a point where we felt very comfortable with ours. And that's when we had it basically checked by the tax assessor collector. And then we provided that version back over to Assessments of the Southwest.
Okay. Now that makes more sense. And I think from a council level, we said take this serious. So to see that the city manager and the CFO running through the worksheet, can't go any higher. So I appreciate that. And then on slide 2, down there at the bottom, CFO has joined TAO. That's not Tax Association, that's Texas Association, right? Okay. I just want to make sure. That's all I had.
Thank you. And I apologize for my tardiness. I had to make the kids breakfast and run out the door. Thank you, guys. Just really quickly, appreciation of the staff. Enjoyed their packet. I'm going to ask 1 or 2 follow-up questions, more so for public record discourse than for my own edification. Recommendations, we're following them. Very happy with that. The goal is internally to have 2 people who can run the calculations, as Member Carbone pointed out, side by side independent. That is the goal. 2 people on the staff can get the inputs and in theory run the worksheet to its final condition.
So Amy and I would have been the 2 that did it this year. And much like we described the process with Assessments of the Southwest, Amy and I were doing that internally. I was running one, she was running one, and we were going, okay, our numbers don't match here. Where'd you get yours from? Here's where I got mine from. Can we figure out which one's right?
So for this budget, Amy and Trent are the workers on the city's behalf doing the worksheet.
Yes, sir. So moving forward, we plan to have, 3 other folks within the finance department that are up to speed and can run that.
Who are those 3 folks? Do we know, by the way?
So we have the Deputy Director Kendra. We go back to wherever that was.
It's Kendra. There you are. It's great to see you.
Kendra. To my left, Rachel Winslow, our budget officer, and then our controller. And it's
Miss Rachel, is she here with us?
Today. So Rachel,
Miss Rachel, okay.
budget officer, and then Tanisha is our controller. She's not here today, but she's the other one.
All right. I just want to be very clear. Once people they're the directly responsible individual, it just seems like things happen. So I'm glad to see that we will have these 3 members of our team be responsible for that. When is the transition point on when it goes from the city manager and the CFO to these 3 individuals?
Yeah, so one of the things I think we really want to do is give those folks a basis of how all this works, and that's through those 2 courses that we've identified. We don't have the schedule for those for next year yet, but in the 23 schedule for 2 or 3 different organizations that conduct those, they were fairly early in the year. So we'll get them in those as soon as possible. We'll, like I said, the notes and the instructions that we took along with the spreadsheet we ran the worksheet in. We'll be able to share that and walk everybody through that as well. It's not easy, but
Oh, great. And just for
I think we've got a good basis for moving forward.
for the public certification, I work adjacent. We work with special districts. This is the hardest thing a taxing entity does all year. It's difficult. It has a lot of inputs. It has a lot of hands on it. It is hard.
And to frame it, we get the information. This year we got it on a Wednesday from 2 counties. From our largest county, we got it Thursday morning, and we turned this budget into the city council a week from that, basically. So to really start to finalize the budget, you have to have those numbers out of the worksheet.
100%.
With our wanting to make sure it was right, and I'll say first time really being the responsible parties for doing this, we were very diligent. It probably wasn't until Tuesday or Wednesday we were able to really lock in and say we got it right, and we know we do. And Assessments of the Southwest is confirming that, and now we can turn the budget team loose. So it was a very extremely compressed. It's always a compressed timeline to get the budget published, and this year I feel like was even more compressed just because we had to spend so much time making sure we understood and got the tax workshop.
I just want to add one more note. God, this thing is so loud. Just my expectation, I'm one member of the council, not the 7, but next year, those 3 individuals can do that in a room with the calculator and the inputs. That's my expectation. We may get there, we may not, but we want to be aspirational about where we're going. Assessments of the Southwest is great as a check reference, but they're not the deciders we need to be. But I'm appreciative of that. For HR purposes, I think if those people can do that on the first try, that is a worthy bonus. That's the most important work product for those 3 individuals, most likely for the year. And so I think we should reward that competency. So that's just some notes and putting that out there for discussion. But I appreciate the team's effort. Thank you for the city manager and the CFO for taking this hands-on approach on the first one. I look forward to having our team be able to do that independent. So thank you.
So, and we did it independent as well this year, but we will continue to have somebody like Assessments of the Southwest,
100%.
because we don't plan to have someone go through the multi-year curriculum to
Great.
get all the credentials to be able to certify the tax worksheet.
Oh,
So
great.
just wanna
They're
just wanna make sure.
a supporting group.
Yeah, just want to make sure there was an understanding. We would
100%.
still have them as part of the process.
Any other questions or comments? All right, with that, Trent, I'd like to say thank you very much for taking a hands-on approach to this. It means a lot that we take a look at it, try and get it correct. Whether it's 100%, might be a little here or there, some adjustments, but really appreciate your effort and time. Same with you, Amy, for taking the time to get this taken care of. The position we were put in last year was pretty tough, and feel the replications of it, this year and possibly next. But really appreciate the effort and time to get that taken care of. Thank you very much.
Sir.
With that, we'll move on to staff presentation of the overview and discussion for the fiscal year 24 proposed budget. Brent, take it away.
Thank you, sir. So this year's budget, we called Realigning for Resilience. And that was, it wasn't just try to come up with something that sounded good or just needing a budget theme. It was purposeful. Realigning is to change to a different position or state, readjust or reorient. And I really feel, based on what we went through with last year and last year's budget and everything since then, we really are, realigning and reorienting and getting us to a different position. And then resilience, we always talk about resilience in our infrastructure, resilience in our finances. I think we demonstrated how resilient our finances were with the issues with the tax valuation last year, that we were able to overcome that without, significant operating issues or operating and service reductions. It showed the resilience in our finances, but we've got to rebuild those now. We want to rebuild those resiliency in our finances. and our ability to recover quickly from difficulties as we did last year, having flexibility, durability, strength. And it's not just in our finances. We want to continue to do that in our infrastructure and the rest of our organization as well. So, we are a city that's committed to public safety. We're committed to our employees. We're committed to infrastructure, and we're committed to the future. Our staff and our leadership team are energized and passionate about meeting the priorities set by City Council. So we appreciate having those strategic priorities that guide our organization. And the 24 budget boosts our investments in those high priorities while making sure we take care of those who serve. So just kind of framing the 24 budget as we go into this, and kind of some of the challenges that we started with is, of course, with the FY23 budget, after passing a tax rate and a budget, we found the $1.3 billion valuation error. Because we had that built into our valuations, we had dropped the tax rate almost 8 cents last year. That created, basically by the end of FY23, our ending budget that we just approved recently, an operating deficit of just over $7 million. So that starts off where we're starting from this year and having to make that up, much less actually do any additional things in FY24. So with that, our departments were extremely diligent in going through their operational budgets and the things that they really needed, and trying to look at everything they could to make us more efficient. And this FY24 budget only includes about a 1.5% increase in expenditures over FY23. So some of the things that made it real difficult to get to that were we had to absorb a significant cost of increase in our property insurance. We restored the $1.3 million in lease payments into our motor pool for our vehicles so that we're ready to replace those when they reach end of life. We restored that into this budget. It is a structurally balanced budget, so our revenues do exceed our expenditures. And then we used our existing resources for maximum efficiency. We looked at, the fire department and the parks department looked at some of their part-time pools of hours and how those aren't being deployed effectively for them. Just sign of the times, just the ability to get people and the number of people you need to fill those spots, and that they can provide that service much more effectively, reduce overtime in the fire department and things like that by reallocating those dollars to actual full-time people. We wanted to make sure we kept our compensation package competitive. So you'll see that I've in our city managers group and organization for the area, there's been a big share of what everybody's proposing in their budget for their compensation packages, and we're right in line with those other cities, so I feel good about that. And then, of course, driving all that was a focus on our strategic priorities and milestones. So I do want to kind of take a step back. After we amended last year's budget, we started talking about this year's budget. So we probably talked more budget this past year than any cities talked about their budget throughout the year ever. We had multiple meetings where we discussed the budget and what this was going to look like for FY24, even to the extent we were doing pretty extensive FY24 budget projections back in January and February. So I wanted to just kind of run through, that was the last frame of what reference for what we talked about, the FY24 budget. So kind of wanted to walk through what our assumptions were for the 24 budget back in January and February versus where we are today with the proposed budget that's in front of you. So, back in January, February, our estimated FY23 beginning fund balance was $33.7 million. After going through closing out the audit and everything, we were a little slightly higher than that at 34. Our estimated 23 revenues we expected back in January, February, were 106.5. And now that we've gotten close to the end of the year and we know where everything's coming in, we're about $1 million under that on our 23 revenues. So those things are the things that kind of set where we go moving forward for FY24. When we were looking at things in January, February, we were looking at different scenarios on assessed value growth, and we were expecting if we had a 10% growth, we'd have a tax rate somewhere between 64 and 67 cents. So we've had a little bit more growth than that. And then we were able to propose a tax rate at just about 65 cents, right in that range of where we were talking about. Back then, we were looking at growth for non-personnel recurring expenses to deal with inflation and everything else at about 3%. That's about where we are on this 24 budget. And then we were looking at a market adjustment and step plan of 4.5%. That's what we have in this budget. Supplementals, we were looking at about $500,000 of supplementals. This budget actually has about $1.16 million in supplementals. We were looking at $500,000 in vehicle replacements. We have zero coming out of the general fund for vehicle replacements. We had some unallocated motor pool balance, and we're using about $500,000 from there to do those vehicle replacements. So you can kind of look at supplementals and vehicle replacements together, and we're kind of right in that range. Streets and sidewalks, 1.6. We did have to pull that down slightly as we were developing the budget to 1.3. The drainage fund had a plan as part of the resolution that established the drainage fund where we were going to add another $125,000 to the drainage fund budget this year. We did that. In January, February, we were still projecting that our sales tax growth for our revenues in 24, we'd have those at about 4%. Based on the last few months, we pulled that number down a little bit to 3.5%. And then our other revenue growth numbers, we thought we'd be in the 2 to 3% range. That's basically where we are. And that doesn't include the TERS administration fee. And then the sick leave buyback, we plan to keep that in the budget, and it is in the budget. And then we were targeting to get our above minimum fund balance above the minimum to $500,000. And I believe what we produced and sent to you last week was about $441,000. We've got a couple of adjustments we're working on that Rachel will run through that have us at about 0.71. $710,000 above the minimum policy balance. So that's just where we were and kind of where we are today. So one thing I wanted to touch on is, valuing our staff. We did in 22 and in the 23 budget, our comp and classification study that was done prior to the 22 budget. And that looked at all of our employees and where they were relative to market. And so as part of the 22 budget, that's where we did the bulk of it, and then finished it up in 23. We had about a $5.5 million impact there to get all of our employees caught up to where market is. And I think it'd been about 5 years prior to that, we'd done our last class and compensation study. And so you can see and in between that, we hadn't moved our pay scales much, and we'd given small COLAs every year. And so you can see the big impact when you wait several years to really make sure we're competitive with the market on our staff. So when we completed that classification compensation study and we had everybody up to market, the annual goal is to provide a competitive market and step adjustment to make sure that we are competitive in between those years where we're doing the compensation studies, so that we don't fall behind every year, and then 5 years down the road, we're looking at another $5 million or $7 million number to try to jam into an already tight budget to get our employees where they need to be. So for the upcoming year, we've got, it's either 4 or 5% effective raise on our non-uniformed public safety employees, and everyone else is a 2% market adjustment, 2% step. And then for our uniform public safety, theirs is a 3% step, and then the 2% market adjustment. So and as I mentioned a minute ago, we did include the 60 hours of sick buyback in there again. And then the other piece of that is we looked at on civil service, where we had some certification pays that had fallen a little bit behind market. So we brought those up to market as well. So, we've heard a lot about inflation and the way that's impacted not just, it impacts our employees, it impacts our residents, it impacts the business we do and all the supplies and things that we have to buy. It impacts our construction contracts. So just wanted to touch on that. So as you see in the news, we're starting to see things moderate. I think we're still feeling the impacts of where we were, but we're seeing that starting to moderate. So I think, if that continues to moderate, then hopefully we'll see some of the pressure that's put on our folks and our citizens, and our budgets will start to ease over the next year. So also want to talk a little bit about what is not in this budget. We've only got $1.3 million in there for the streets funding. And so as we've talked about every year, when we did our last street assessment, there was between streets and sidewalks about $4.6 million in 2014 dollars that we need to be putting into our funding to keep our pavement index at a level where it has been. And we haven't been doing that. Now we've been able to do some other things. We've done some neighborhood street reconstructions. In this 2023 bond package, we passed the gap and sidewalk repair package, which will help us out there. But we do need to, I just want to put that on the radar that as we move forward, we've got to continue to add dollars into our street fund so we can keep up with those needs. And then we also currently have a street assessment, an updated street assessment going on. So sometime late this year, we should have new numbers on where we are from a street index, as well as what the dollars are we need in the future to keep that at the level it is at today. So then what also is not in this budget, there's 65 general fund vehicles and pieces of equipment that are eligible for replacement. So they've hit those thresholds for replacement, and they're valued at about $4.4 million, and we are still trying to catch up on replacing those vehicles. And then we've got about $3.3 million in supplemental staffing requests from our departments in the general fund on needs there, about 2.8 from the public safety group, 275,000 for Parks and Rec, and then 782,000 in internal service department staff. And then we've got about $3 million in non-personnel requests, and a lot of that is in the technology replacement, which you saw as part of the IT 5-year strategic plan. And then I think I really want to point out this last one here, I really feel this budget as presented gets us kind of back to square one after what we dealt with last year. So it gets us back to a point where now we've got a balanced budget. We're taking care of our people. We've got our motor pool back in there. But one of the things we were not able to accomplish this year is, last year we established the IT and facilities internal service funds with a plan on this year's budget to start putting money into the capital reserves for those two funds. So when we need to replace a roof, we have the money to replace a roof. When we need to replace, switches or servers, we've got the money set aside to replace those. We still do not, we were not able to in this budget, with catching up from where we were, able to put any dollars into the capital reserve fund for the IT or the facilities. So that's a big need going forward that we were not able to take care of at all in this budget. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Rachel Winslow, our budget officer, to take off. But before that, I do want to just say thanks to Rachel. She's done an incredible job putting this budget together and leading her team. She's got a very young team as far as being tenured here at the City of Pearland. And so they're learning, and they've been willing to learn and put the hours in. But it is a learning process. So she's been able to lead them through that. So I do want to introduce the rest of her team as well. Chan Tran is our financial analyst, and she's right here. And then Lori Stewart-Turner, she's one of our budget analysts. Lori's right there. And then Stephen Wansley, Stephen's right there. He's our other budget analyst. And then Peter Williams is our capital improvement budget analyst. So that's Rachel's team. They've done a great job through this, and appreciate everything they've done. And then also I want to say thanks to Amy and Kendra and the work they've done to support everybody and help put this together. And then, of course, you see everybody else here, all the directors, their budget staffs. Appreciate what they've done and worked on through this budget, because they were very responsive to what the needs of the city were and what they saw with what we went through this last year on the budget. And they developed very tight, very thoughtful budgets that we were able to work through and review, and in order to be able to put together a budget that I think gets us back to where we can move forward on good footing, good ground, and continue to serve the citizens of Pearland as best we can in all the services that we provide. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Rachel to start taking us through each component of the budget. So we'll go through each component, we'll stop for any questions, and then we'll jump back in when we've gotten through that point of it. And then, of course, any questions that we can't just answer from here today, we'll take good notes. We'll answer those questions prior to the next time we sit down to talk about budget, and just continue through this budget process for the next couple of months. So thank you.
Thank you, Trent. Good morning, Mayor Pro Tem and Council. Thank you for your time today. To start out with, we want to discuss some of the major changes from the printed proposed budget book to this morning. Our Truth in Taxation cover letter has been updated to correct a typo in the debt service rate. You were provided a handout today, and it's been updated in all of our digital materials. We've also reduced the general fund expenditures to 114 million, kind of flat. This was the result of reducing the parks mowing contract by 210,000 to offset their parks maintenance crew, part of realigning their budget to better fit their needs. And additionally, we reduced the police animal services veterinary contract in order to swap that for half of, or a part-time position or half of an FTE, which resulted in overall savings of $13,900. So the big picture for our general fund is that this is a balanced budget where our annual revenues do exceed the annual operating costs, and we do meet our fund minimum policies. As you can see, we're $700,000 over policy minimum with 92 days of reserves on hand. So our proposed tax rate is in between the no new revenue rate and the voter approved rate, and staff completed the tax worksheet calculations, which were validated and signed by Assessments of the Southwest. The no new revenue rate would bring in $16.9 million less than the proposed fiscal year 24 rate. Our taxable values are charted here in this table. So the city's taxable roll increased from 9.4 to 10.8 billion, and the TERS valuation increased from 3.4 to 3.9. Our total proposed property tax rate for fiscal year 24 is 65 cents, which is made up of a 32-cent M&O rate and a 33.29 or 33-cent debt rate. Our proposed property tax rate is an ongoing 6-cent decrease over the last 4 years, but does represent an increase from fiscal year 23. All of our property tax rates for the last 3 years were adopted below the no new revenue rate. Fiscal year 24 is a 3-cent increase, and fiscal year 24's rate is proposed below the voter approved rate and uses a portion of prior year's unused increment calculation that is part of the voter approved calculation, and 39.8 million in current collections to the general fund, and it was in 41.3 million to the debt service fund. The state of Texas tax worksheets from Assessments of the Southwest that were also signed by them are included in the front portion of your binder. And the general fund O&M rate increased from 28 cents in fiscal year 23 to 32 cents in fiscal year 24, and our debt service tax rate has decreased from 33 cents to 33.8 to 33.2 cents. If we were to go to the no new revenue rate, we would see a decrease in general fund revenue and receive a total between the tax collection and the TERS admin fee of 38.8. And if we were to go to the full voter approved rate, we would see general fund revenues of 65.2. Homestead exemptions, council discussed changing homestead exemptions at the June meeting. At that time, the legislature was still in session, so we opted to let that play out and not make any changes. and we will be bringing that homestead exemption discussion back in the fall for future consideration. Some homestead property tax bill examples are shown below. So looking at estimated individual tax bills, a zero growth property with a value of $300,000 would see an increase of $93 annually, or $7.75, based on the Pearland portion of their bill. Looking at an additional example, example 8, home value with $560,000 would see a 10% increase in their taxable value, would see an annual increase of $483 or $40.25 per month. And then if we look generally at a property tax bill comparison, which compares the different tax rates of different taxing entities, you can see that the city of Pearland is only a portion of the overall tax bill, and based upon information we have gathered about other taxing entities' tax rates, overall residents will be seeing, or in this case, will be seeing a decrease in their tax bill, even with the proposed tax rate change for the city of Pearland. So what does 1 cent in property taxes mean in our O&M property taxes? It's about $1 million in revenue to the general fund, and it would impact the average homeowner at about $36 per year. So what do we use our budget for? It is our policy document. It's how we set our goals for the year. It's our financial plan for our departments and an operation guide to their staff, as well as a communications device that we use to communicate with our departments and with the public. So now we'll transition into overall general fund revenues. The general fund revenues for fiscal year 24 are projected at $115 million. Revenues will exceed expenditures. The primary sources of revenue for the general fund include property taxes, sales and use taxes, as well as charges for services. That charges for services is primarily the TERS admin fee. So for our sales tax revenue throughout fiscal year 23, we've seen significant sales tax growth. So our fiscal year 24 budget is proposed with additional 3.5% in sales tax growth over the fiscal year 23 amended budget in general fund. As always, staff will monitor sales tax performance each month and will adjust via the scheduled budget amendments to as needed. Sales tax revenues, not including the mixed drink tax, are budgeted for $31.6 million in fiscal year 24, and they represent 27.8% of total general fund revenue. The PEDC also budgets for a portion of sales tax at $15.9 million, and they use those funds for uses as defined by state law. So 80% of the general fund revenue comes from 3 of our main revenue sources: sales taxes, property taxes, and charges for services. The charges for services are mostly comprised of that TERS administration fee. Our general fund expenditures for fiscal year 24 total $114 million. As you can see here, we do have a balanced budget. We do meet our policy reserves, and we will have 92 days of reserves on hand, and we're meeting and maintaining our core services. So our primarily expense budget is primarily related to public safety, with Public Works as the next big candidate, department, and so will total about $114 million. So as a people organization, the general fund expenditures are primarily related to salaries and wages, and public safety is one of council's top goals and is also FTE intensive. That's where a lot of our employees are, and so therefore it is a major source of our expenditures, with 60% of expenditures being accountable to public safety function. All included supplementals in the fiscal year 2024 budget are tied to strategic priority milestones or the realignment of existing dollars. So the long-term trends do show that public safety has continued to grow as a function of the City of Pearland budget, and you can see how the other departments trend here as well. Not really any big significant changes for fiscal year 24. So the proposed budget expenditures by category, as mentioned, as a people organization, it's primarily our salaries and wages. So for fiscal year 24, 76.5 million of our operating budget is related to those salaries and wages. A large portion next goes to our internal service funds, then our miscellaneous services, which are really those professional contracts and things like that. We're not seeing a large amount of changes throughout our operating categories in fiscal year 24. So this year we broke up the proposed budget into those different functions. So we'll start out with the general government. These are the departments that fit into that category, and we noted here all the proposed budgets are reflective of the salary and wage changes, and then we noted here any other changes that might have impacted those departmental operating budgets. And then we're breaking out and tying those supplementals both to the operating budgets and those strategic priorities. So there were not any supplementals funded for the general government budget. Our next category is public safety. This includes police, fire, and the Office of Emergency Management. So primarily these changes in budgets are related to the realignment of staff between different divisions, and then the additional IT transfers and the supplementals that are shown on the next page. There are a number of supplementals that we were able to include for public safety based off of the strategic priorities. One thing the fire operations did is realign their part-time staffing in order to fund 3 full-time firefighter positions. This is cost neutral because of that realignment, and it will better serve their staffing needs and help them control their overtime costs. We funded a police sergeant with a vehicle in response to House Bill 3, and so this will be reflected in the SRO division. Over time, this will be fully reimbursable by PISD, but there's an initial year 1 cost for the capital costs, which are then paid over time, reimbursed over time by PISD. We've added 2 police officers with vehicles to the patrol division. Their vehicles are paid for in the motor pool fund and did not require transfer from general fund. This will help them meet their staffing needs. We have year 1 of 5 for the replacement of end-of-life police radios. We just did this process with the fire department, and now we'll be going through it with the police department. In direct tying to the strategic priorities and milestones, we funded a public safety dispatching study to explore a single dispatch center for police and fire. And then we've added an all hazards incident management course to increase incident management team staff proficiency with the ICS planning process. Our engineering and public works division, there's some changes here, primarily in realigning how we display our expenditures so that we can better track our spending on streets and drainage individually. What was formerly the streets and drainage division is now split, and there's a separate streets division, so we can track that separately. Now streets division includes the streets operating cost and the transfer to the infrastructure reinvestment fund, while the streets and drainage division primarily reflects that transfer to the drainage maintenance fund. The strategic priority supplemental funded here is a business process review and update for our capital improvement plan. This is fully reimbursable from the CIP funds and actually has a net impact to the general fund of 0. Community Services Division, the changes here primarily relate to the trade-off between the 2 supplementals that we've been funding. Last year we had a software replacement in development services, and this year we have the one-time UDC update and planning. So the strategic priority supplementals here are the annual UDC update under strong economy, estimated to cost $300,000, and the 311 call center in the communications budget to hire a consultant to help us plan that process out at $30,000. Our final category is Parks and Recreation. So the Parks and Recreation budgets didn't see a lot of changes. Overall, there was a 1% change, and they do have a number of supplementals that they were able to fund by making better utilization of already existing budgeted dollars. They took their part-time hours, which were a pool, and converted them into a number of full-time positions across the Aquatics and Recreation Operations Division in order to better meet the needs of their facilities and their customers. Additionally, they took a look at one of their maintenance contracts and they realized that they could improve services and their level of performance by changing that into a full-on parks maintenance crew, which will be 4 people in FY24. Those 4 people will start in January. So this is just a picture of the citywide staffing. So this is the total across all funds and all divisions, and I believe it is now 907.5 with the addition of that part-time veterinarian. No, this is all funds, all departments. Yes. So that concludes our general fund discussion, and we'll take any information requests or questions.
All right, thank you. Any questions, comments from council?
Can you, can we go back to slide 26 real quick? So I think you said it's 3.5%. Yeah, on the first bulletin you said it's 3.5% sales growth. Can you tell me what the sales growth has been in the last 5 years? I know on the EDC has been double digits, so I'm assuming you guys are double digits.
I think we got the preliminary numbers for August, and we're at 6.6%. We can get back to you on the trend for the whole last 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to see the trend, right? Like you're trying to be conservative and giving us 5.5% when the trend has been higher than that. So that's just one thing I would like to know, because that will have a significant impact on your budget, right? So, and that's obviously, I believe, the slide before, maybe slide 20. Yeah, so your sales tax, you're showing $32 million. It could be higher, right?
40 is what's being projected.
That's property tax.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sales, sorry, 32. So we'll take a look at that. I don't think we've had any years in a long time that have been double digits. I know we had budgeted 4% for FY23. So we let this past year, we budgeted at 4%. And I think EDC budgeted a little bit lower than ours. And it's come in maybe 4.5. We updated that when we did our amended budget here a couple months ago. And so our amended budget, we're actually running a little bit behind that for the last couple of months for 23. But we had seen that trend down across the year. So just being conservative, making sure we weren't going to create problems later on, we pulled down our estimate for 24 to 3.5. But we can provide some trend data as well.
Any other questions or comments? Member Hernandez.
Thank you, sir. I've got a couple. So it was mentioned in the presentation that I guess some of the transitions between the part-time, multiple part-time into the full-time was to control the overtime cost. And when I was looking through just generally the budget across, all the different departments, just from fire and police alone, there was about $5 million in overtime expenses. And I see that, in some of the other ones, we kind of shoot a little low and we end up high, and then we still budget low and end up high. And I see that we've aligned some of those with, I think, what the expectation should be. So I'm thankful for that, because I think it's given us a more realistic view. But to the point of realigning those positions, what is the overall plan? Because there was no way for me to add up all of the overtime, but I'm assuming just being $5 million in those 2 departments, it's going to be, maybe another, I have no idea, I'm just spitballing here, but if we got another $1 million across all the other departments, that's a real number. What is our plan to address overtime kind of in general and get some of those?
So I'll kind of kick things off and may ask the chiefs to chime in. On the fire side, we have I think it's 44, 45 people on a shift. We need 41, 42 actually on the trucks and available. That really doesn't give you enough to have people off for vacation, training, any kind of FMLA leave or any other kind of leave. And so that's part of doing this is we, over time, we want to continue to bump that up till we reach a point that's kind of your equilibrium point. You've got enough people on each shift that they can take their time off, they can do their training, and when people are sick, that we're able to fill all those seats.
Yeah, I feel
but
like,
not have
and
too
I guess
many.
to that point,
And
Trent,
so,
5 million again seems like a big number. That seems like it would translate into a lot of people that we could just
right. So the other part of that plan is we are in for a SAFER grant right now, and we hope to hear about that later this year. That will allow us to bring on a significant number of people, fire department personnel, and have those paid for either entirely or a large part of over 3 years. And so if we get that, we'll be able to address a lot of those things immediately. But at the same time, we're trying to ramp up in preparation for fire station number 7. So that'll kind of fill that overtime issue in the meantime. And then we'll continue to need to add people so that when Fire Station 7 is ready to go online, we have the folks ready to go. So that's kind of the longer term plan. Let's say we don't get that SAFER grant, then maybe we start looking at okay, let's take some of those overtime dollars and go ahead and start building that permanent staff in there earlier. And then on the PD side, there is a supplemental request for I think it was 7 officers this year, and we've filled 2 of those, and so there's just kind of always a balance about how many you can add and how many in the pipeline. And
for that, if we were to do, has the analysis been done already that if we were to add 1 or 2 more, that would reduce the overtime output?
So I think, there's often the analysis of will it, and then the reality of you do it, and it doesn't always quite realize the savings you think it will from an overtime standpoint, but that's something.
Well, and I've heard kind of the phrase mandatory overtime used a couple of times, and I still, so is that kind of training related, or?
That's more on the fire side, I believe, but maybe we have Chief Taylor weigh in on that, and then maybe Chief Spires as well on the overtime question.
Absolutely. Thank you. Member Hernandez, it's a great question. So regarding the overtime that we have, and I know you understand with the fire department, we have a minimum amount of personnel that have to be, we're talking about fire operations only, but a minimum amount of personnel that have to be in the seats, rear ends in the seats every day. We have to have 42. And so unlike any other entity, if someone's sick and not there, we don't have a vacant seat and they catch up on that business when they come back to work. We have to have someone in that seat. So 42 is our minimum that we have to operate with currently with the 6 firehouses that we have. When I arrived, we had 43 on 2 shifts assigned to those 2 shifts and 44 on the 3rd. So that was what was assigned to those shifts to achieve the 42. However, we have to allow 5 off for accrued benefits each day. And that doesn't count training. That doesn't count FMLA and the 24 babies we've had the year I've been here. We've already had 24 members off on extended FMLA. So that's another part of that Trent refers to, that's that dynamic part that you can't really rein in. But when you talk about mandatory overtime, we have to have someone there. So we do have voluntary opportunities for overtime. Overtime's overtime. So either someone chooses to fill that spot, or if no one chooses to fill it, we have a method of grabbing the first available to put into that position, and that's mandatory overtime. But either way, overtime is overtime. And so for years with the fire department, with all the challenges of building a fire department, going from volunteer to where we are fully professional now, adding the coverages with the city and trying to maintain with the growth, we hired at a 1-to-1 ratio. So for every new position that we hired in the fire department, we hired 1 personnel, where inevitably 1.2 to 1.3 to 1 is an optimum ratio, because it gives you that sweet spot that you look for, and every city's different, where that sweet spot is on the amount of healthy overtime you want to pay. You don't want to pay too little, you don't want to pay too much, but what's that sweet spot? we roughly believe that the sweet spot for us assigned to each shift, if we get to 48 per shift, that's approaching that to where we're going to have a very healthy and a lower amount of overtime that give us the healthy amount. 1.3 is 54 per shift. Personally, I don't think that's where we need to be, but when we get to 48, we're having those healthy discussions. Currently, with the 4 we added last year on October 1st, that put each shift at 45. With the 3, we're asking we asked for 6 firefighters, but 3 we were able to reappropriate using part-time funds that aren't being utilized because of the challenges from COVID and other issues. Our part-time firefighters are career firefighters at other departments. So they might be from Houston, they might be from Missouri City. You pick a department. So their onus and their responsibility is to their career department. And so we lose a lot of personnel from mandatory overtime at their own departments. Plus, with the onset of COVID, it's changed a lot of directives from fire departments and other health entities that they don't prefer their personnel to work for other health-related or first responder organizations because they foot the bill on the backside if they become injured or infected by a virus. And so that really limits those numbers. And then we'll have folks that sign up for part-time work, but then the day before they'll get tabbed at their department for mandatory overtime, and they are responsible that's their first responsibility, their priority. So we lose them, and in the end, we have to hit a mandatory on that as well. So all that to be said, we're looking to achieve that proper ratio where we have a healthy amount of overtime, and as we begin pulling numbers, as we're adding this staff, we'll be able to give more detailed, refined numbers to dictate what that sweet spot is for us and what the optimal amount of personnel are. Trent also mentioned the SAFER grant. That SAFER grant we applied for, the window is opening now so that we're starting to see those awards come out. We haven't seen if we have or have not received that yet. That should go up through September, October. That's 15 FTE for Future Firehouse 7. However, he's correct. That's 100% for 3 years, pay and benefits for those firefighters. So that'll have us have them here, have them trained, have them ready for Firehouse 7 to be opened in what is proposed as 2027 currently. And if we get them hired, that will give us a windfall of personnel during that 2.5 year period. We'll really be able to use that to our advantage to really see how that affects our numbers. Until we open that station. The day we open that station, it drops back to the same ratios we're at currently.
Okay, so we're working towards finding what that ratio is. And
yes, sir.
Equilibrium. Okay, and it sounds like you also want to retrofit the fire trucks with car seats for all the babies. Is that?
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, we've had a lot. We have a young department, and I don't know what's in the water, but Stacy and I have given away 24 onesies this year. Yeah, but it's been fun.
I'm sorry, I forgot the question.
How do you fix your overtime budget, Chief?
Yes, I got it. A lot of that applies to us also. We do have built-in overtime. We're on the 12-hour shift, so there's mandatory overtime every week for the officers. We try to maintain a certain staffing, just like the fire department does, at least 18 per squad. It's not mandatory, but we do have those posted every single day so people can sign up for that. Additionally, the more people you have, the more we don't take off on holidays or anything like that, so you're going to pay more on overtime for holiday pay, more people out sick, obviously babies, just like the fire department's doing. We're trying to keep up with them on our staffing with our babies also. So
right.
That's a recruitment tool. That's a recruitment tool.
Yeah.
So a lot of it's the same, and there is a balance there somewhere. If you only have a couple openings, sometimes you can fill that with overtime, and that's cheaper than having a full-time officer. But we asked for 7 this year, so we try to get to 20 per squad. Right now, we can maintain 18 with the overtime, so eventually there's going to be, we're going to have to really look at that closer. More people or more overtime.
Okay, I appreciate that. Do you also have a ratio? I mean, yours is not mandatory like the fire department, I suppose, but is there like a sweet spot that you're aiming for as well? I mean, or is it just?
So ours is revolved around how many per squad. Like I said, we're trying to get to 20. And also full-time officers to resident ratio. We try to look at that real close. Right now we're at 1.35, which is the lowest we've been since I can remember being here. We also look at response times. And our response times are trending, they're They're not bad right now, but they're trending upwards, and we don't want to let them get out of control.
Well, like knowing those ratios exist, I think that would be helpful to help illustrate, where we are as a city versus other cities, departments, things like that, how that does impact response times, and that would be helpful. Thank you for those. Second question is on the difference between the 4 and the 5%, the uniform versus non-uniform. What was the driver there? I'm just trying to think if I were a non-uniformed.
Sure. So when we adopted the last class and compensation study and moved the non-exempt personnel that are non-uniform to a step plan, that step plan was established with a 2% increase when they make the next step. And then the civil service one has always been at 3. And Lori, I don't know if you have any more background on how we came to that conclusion.
Yes, so both fire and PD step plans, the move from step 1 to step 2 is a 3% difference. And so with the employees who are non-exempt, non-uniform, their step plan difference between step 1 and step 2 is 2%. So that's why you have the differences of 4 and 5% with the market adjustment.
Okay, and then for the non-eligible employees that get the lump sum, when is that paid out? Is that at the beginning of the year, mid-year?
For the civil service staff members, that is paid out on the anniversary date. For civil service and for everyone else, is paid out on the first payroll period following the adoption of pay plans.
Okay, so on their work anniversary, they get on the following, is that what you're saying?
For police officers, yes.
For civil service.
Got it. And then this is kind of just a terminology question, but on what are we considering, or what constitutes significant change in each one of the categories? Because I saw some of them, have the little annotations, and I'm just curious how y'all decide this deserves annotation, this doesn't.
Yeah, I tried to cut the threshold off at 10%, but I think I addressed just a few that were around 8 or 9%. So 10% in either way or higher.
Okay. If we can actually get a firm policy on that, it would help me as well to go through and be like, to know, hey, this is impacting this category in this way. That's why it's notated. That would help. And
I think so. I think the threshold's 10, but if there's something that's real close to 10 that's notable, then she would add notes to that. So
that's across the whole category, correct? So, because I noticed some of them are driven. Let's say that it may not be 10, but if it's significant enough to add, let's say 3 positions, I would still like to know. And I know that's in the highlights, but kind of going through. And I guess we can talk about that later. The next one was on the call center. I like the fact that we're moving towards that. Prior to moving forward with bringing a consultant on for that specifically, one thing that I would like to have happen across the entire organization, and I've mentioned this multiple times, that I really want us to come up with an overall customer service, user experience, kind of unified communication plan across all of our platforms, all of our means of communication with the public. So that if they're going to the website or the app, or they make a phone call or whatever it is, I want there to be really consistent brand of service. And before we bring in this call center, I really want the focus to be on the experience. So I don't know if.
So I'll get Josh maybe to jump in here, but I believe what the purpose for this initial what's in the budget is to actually develop the business plan, which would include what you're talking about, the uniform communications plan and those sort of things, and then lay out a path for us to get towards that call center type thing. So I think it would cover what he's talking about. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's part of the expectation. So knowing where we are now and having an idea of where we want to be in a future state, this consultant will help us set that glide path to get there. But certainly a part of that is a knowledge base and scripting that does bring some consistency and consolidation to everything that we talk about, and then how we build that over time. So we're in parallel path on our own as a small internal working group, working on the technologies that we have, need, or want that get us to that place. And then we're also interviewing other people who have other organizations that have existing call centers or 311 centers to see what our counterparts are doing. So we're really relying on this consultant to fill in the gaps that we can't or don't feel like we have the bandwidth or expertise to fill on our own, but we are thinking in that direction already.
Okay, that's good to know. All right, thank you for that. And going back, I forgot to say this about the 4 and 5 for the individuals who are not eligible because they don't have the next step available. I think just generally inflation is starting to even out and find its footing. But I think 2 is still, it's still a little low. So I don't know, even 3 seems more in line with what would keep people whole moving forward. So I know that would be an increase, obviously, but just to take a look at that, see if it's possible, what it would do to the budget. And my final comment, thank you for the deference here, Mayor Pro Tem, for all the time, is somewhere in this budget, and I don't know if Matt wants to try to take this so we don't have to do it from general fund, but one of the things that I've wanted to see happen for a long time is just taking a look. If we're doing the UDC overhaul this year, part of that is trying to find a way to, I don't know if it's relax the rules or strengthen the rules or whatever we need to do to actually put some emphasis on redevelopment in Old Town. I think as Sullivan gets nearer and nearer to completion, and I know we've talked about, roadways going one way or the other, but really honestly, I would like to take a look at that. So however we need to do that, whatever study we need, that would be something I would really like.
So I think those things are all going to kind of fold in together, where we've got in the EDC budget and Old Town plan update. Mm-hmm. And then, it's going to have some recommendations on uses and, what you can do in and there. And that should inform some of what we look at and do in the UDC in that area.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that they were somewhat in tandem, because if we did this update and then we end up coming with this other stuff, we'd have to then do another update. So
sure.
All right. And that's all I have. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Member Kamkar?
Just a question for the staff. From a format perspective, you want us to ask questions on these slides, or is it the items in the general fund per se? Because I know this is the general fund piece.
Yeah, so we're covering the general fund, so I think anything general fund related.
Okay. All right. Well,
did I open the door too wide for you?
No, I
just kidding.
I committed to being a kinder, gentler Alex Kamkar, if you guys recall earlier this summer. So, what was I going to say? I do need a little deference. There's a couple items I want to cover. I will probably not go as long as Member Hernandez, but I think there are some relevant items. Can we go to slide 16 on the PDF? The first bullet, I did not vote for the FY23 budget because it was not at the no new rate. The way that this is being prefaced is that the budget was passed was at the no new rate. We were a ½ cent below the voter approved rate when that budget was passed. I know that there were items that happened beyond that vote, but I do think that needs to be cleaned up. I would say put a notation there. Where we are today after amending is different than what was adopted. I didn't vote for that, and I don't want there to be any misconception. Where we are today may be above or below the no new rate, but what was adopted by the council in September of 23 was not. I'm just pointing that out. You guys can do what you want to do with it, but I think we need to be historically accurate. Can we go to page 49, slide 49? Format item, can we just put totals on this? It is a great.
Yep. I've got that one in my notes. So
there you go. All right, that's good for me. Book. Here, let me go to this one. So in my book, you sent out the links for the proposed budget, that book 1 and 2. I can't find where the tax collections piece is. in those bindings and in the online, what is tagged online. You guys have that in the links for the books now? So each one of the books that all the members have a link on the website directly for that PDF. I don't find the property tax collections piece in book one.
In the PDF or in your binder?
In the PDF.
Okay.
And I would like to talk about this page, which is page 2.
Okay, sure.
I'll filibuster for a minute. Maybe we can pull that up quickly. Question for us: you send out vacancies? You send out a vacancies list. I made the request, and then we put it out to the council. Are we still at roughly 59 open positions? Is that, I mean, roughly speaking, just roughly, directionally speaking?
Sure. I mean, we had a new hire orientation that was a good sized class this week. We had all of our, summer folks that do lifeguarding and camp counselors leave our employment this week. So it's ever shifting. We're always filling positions, always having positions come open. So it's not, it's not a static single number.
Can we go to the PDF for general fund, page 2? I have it as page 70 in the PDF.
I'm sorry, which page was that?
General fund, page 2, which is page 70 in the PDF for book 1.
Remember Cam Carwar, they're looking for that.
Yeah.
I'll say thank you, everybody,
Sure.
for coming out early on a Saturday morning to join us. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Amy, for all you did for the budget. I appreciate it.
Appreciate the filibustering.
Kind of like a soccer match. We got to stop this time.
Apologies, Rachel's going to take over because she has the book more readily available.
Okay, if I can ask a question, then, since I wasn't here earlier, but I was listening. Trent, on the back and forth between Southwest and the city, are those questions you said we're comparing kind of iterations? Is that comparison done by email or is it in-person meeting or? Okay.
Both.
I was just thinking because we do have, so many newer members just kind of in that department that if Evan Forfin, something happened there, that we would just have that documentation that we could look back on. But
Yeah, so a lot of it was verbal, a lot of it was email back and forth. There was the same thing with the Brazoria tax assessor collector, back and forth there. There was conversations with HCAD as well. And, but, the summary of all those that arrived at, this is the right number and this is the source of that number, that's all very well documented in our.
Awesome. Because I was just saying, because in the report, the emails were extremely helpful to illustrate things. So thank you. That's all.
Yes, sir.
And before we go there, can we go to the page that has the corrections in the presentation that we were changing the debt rate a small amount? We were going low fast and I didn't get that number.
So I believe that the total rate and the debt rate was correct everywhere except in that cover sheet. There was a typo on the debt rate.
Do we have that number? Just because that was the one I was going to scratch out of my book.
Sure. We handed out a new sheet for that to put in your book. this morning, so you can.
Point.
I think we had 0.32 and it was supposed to be 0.33.
8765.
Yeah, and then the total rate was accurate.
Sorry about that.
And then I believe everywhere else, except in my transmittal letter, we had it correct. So we've got that corrected.
That was a little boo-boo, not a big boo-boo. Can we go to page 2 then? On the general fund, I just want to, there we go. So reading through this, I feel like this is the clearest summation of kind of what we're doing here as a city. I mean, it's obviously super grossed up. It is a top line number. I just want to make sure I'm understanding this as accurately as can be. So the total revenues the city is planning to receive via water, sales tax, everything is 115.2 million.
This is just general fund, so no water.
Okay, sorry, you're right. And we had last year at the end of the amending process for the big boo-boo, 105 million, so it's 10 million more. Okay. Or 9.7 rounding up. Total expenditures for this year projected is 114.2. And then we ended, I guess, the year at 112.6 after amending. So my question is because we have such a distinct difference, wide gap, I guess, between revenues and expenditures, is this us filling the gap from last year, or how would we quantify this?
Sure. So once our tax valuation issue was discovered, the major changes we made to the general fund budget to deal with that is that we removed our lease payments into the motor pool. We used some one-time revenues from ARPA to fill that gap. And then the third big thing we did was, I just went blank. We did ARPA. Oh, we drew down our fund balance significantly. So we had a larger over fund balance policy, so we drew that down significantly. So basically, we were able to make it through the year doing those three things. And so to kind of get back made whole starting this year, we first kind of have to make up that, revenue over expenditures gap. And then we were able to add a few things strategically into this budget. So that's why you see the expenditures just barely going up, but we got to bring the revenues up to make sure we have a structurally balanced budget.
Do we, trying to get at this a little bit, the unallocated fund balance that was run down, do we have a rough number of what that was at the beginning of this process last year, not at the end?
I think we've got a slide in here that shows what the unallocated fund balance was for 22 or into 22.
I'm trying to actually give a compliment here in a weird way.
So when we adopted the fiscal year 23 original budget, we were 1.8 million over our 3-month policy. So we drew that, and then actually based off of the prior year's 9.3. So we drew down those two fund balance numbers.
So I just kind of want to illustrate for the city's benefit, we were in a gigantic hole. Yesterday was a gigantic boo-boo. Last budget was gigantic. I believe at the end of this year, we'll have $400,000 in unallocated fund balance, that 431 number that we see on the screen.
Yeah, 431's in your budget. We've got a little tweak to that since we published the budget. We're at about 710.
And that's from that lawn contract.
Yes, sir.
Okay. No, I want to appreciate the team's hard efforts. That 400,000 or 700 isn't very sexy by any stretch compared to those numbers, but it just tells you how much hard work and hard sledding had to happen and how bad last year was. I don't know how else to say that. But I really appreciate the team's efforts on that front. Really quickly, on the budgets that we have projected, where we've got $108 million in spend, roughly speaking, I think, for the proposed budget. I just question, how is that process prepared? I know we're adding up a lot of departments and then it just kind of gets topped off, but process-wise, how is that done?
So process-wise, the departments enter their operating budgets, so they're responsible for everything that's not personnel and benefits, any funded supplementals that are decided later during the process, and they also do not do their transfers. Those transfers are calculated by the budget department, but all of their operating costs are entered, and then the budget office reviews in a process with the departments and city manager to validate those proposed expenditures.
So those departmental budgets are on page 8 of the general fund, is that correct?
So the overall total for those departmental budgets in the general fund are on page 8 and 9.
And so for general government, the department heads, I guess, Darren for legal and the city secretary and the city manager, they are the ones that produce the numbers that are on the screen for FY24.
Excluding anything related to personnel and benefits and transfers, yes.
So Chief Spires, you need, if I'm reading this correctly, $28.9 million for next year, according to this budget.
I'm not sure if that's everybody we included or not.
Your police
I know
administration.
we asked for, I think, 27. Chad, am I right?
Sorry, I'm attributing the wrong line here. 39.1. That's what you need for the next year?
That was our recommendation for staffing, yes.
So let's clarify. So this is the proposed budget. You know, the chief submitted his budget with all of his needs in the different categories, plus his supplemental request. This does not fund all of his supplemental request. It funds the 2 police officers, the sergeant, and a handful of other things we were able to squeeze in. But he asked for 7 officers. We're only funding 2. So it's not everything he asked for, but this is what we're able to fund in this year's.
In the eyes of the team, this is what we need to run. Was it Department 201 or 200? What is the designation?
255.
All right, 255. This is what we need, 39.1 million.
So that is the recommended budget.
Okay. And then for fire, 28.9 million. And then for community services, 5.4.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Chief, as far as I got a question, if we need, or is there a possibility to forego 1% of your 39.1, which in this case would be 391,000?
Which would do what?
If we need it, could you forego it if we asked?
I'm gonna have to defer to city manager on that. I'm not sure exactly what you're asking me to do.
Just saying, if we needed to find dollars for other priorities, can we forego 1% of your budget if possible?
1% of my budget would be
390,000. So I think we need to kind of look at this in light of other than personnel. The chief and really everyone else's budgets are very, very flat. They're not going up as far as the cost of the daily supplies and the materials and everything that the departments need to operate. That is very flat, and the departments were very very good in going through those this year and streamlining and getting anything out of the budget, tightening things up, because they, at the same time, they're keeping those very flat. We are dealing with a lot of, inflation over last year.
I hear you,
So,
but you're up
you know,
1.7.
to pull anything out of there when they still have needs above and beyond that 39 million is a struggle.
I hear you. I'm just pointing out, and the numbers are on here. The numbers are telling the story. It's not flat. It's 39.1 versus 37.4. It's a number.
That is
I don't want to see
mostly personnel costs. If we want to do the step and market adjustment, that's going to be a large part of that increase.
I've just.
May I ask Member Kemcar? I'm just trying to. What is the overall scope? I'm trying to understand what you're asking.
What I'm trying to get to, because we had a lot of brain damage in the last budget cycle about, can we find a nickel? And if members on this body, many of them who were from last year, we had amendments to do 1 cent less, and we couldn't get a second.
But I'd like to see
more
other than police.
No, and I'm not proposing that. I'm not offering an amendment or anything. What I'm asking is, if we need 1% from every department, is 1% doable? I'm not saying we should. I'm not offering an amendment. I didn't put a proposal out there. But what I'm hearing in this budget process is that the department head submitted, we're being told it's flat. Compared to other years, it is relatively flat, but we're still going to be above the no new rate, not by a little bit. And so I'm just asking in a workshop to the fire chief, if we needed 1% of your budget, if the leadership decided.
Member Kamgar, are you going to go through every department that has this?
So they're the two biggest ones, in fairness.
So I think
understand that.
if there was a consensus of council to say that's what we're doing, we'd go figure it out. But to sit here and ask the departments whether they can do that right here in the workshop when they've got lots of needs that we were not able to move forward with in this budget, I think that's tough to just be put on the spot and answer like that.
Everybody here is a paid employee. I mean, it's a fair question. Is 1% doable, Chief?
I would say I'm with Trent. If we had to look at that, we would determine a way. But what we did with this budget, it does appear flat. The increases that you're seeing really are merely our contractual proposed contract increases. We've kept everything flat as we possibly can and gotten creative as far as, in a sense, for us, we requested 6 firefighters. We're unable to achieve the other 3 because we don't have the money in the city to do that, which is understandable. That's 1% of that difference. But we got creative with our part-time to use funding within our department. But the flat and the IT, we had the IT transfers into our department as well. So that'll show a little bit of an increase that goes along with the contractual increases. So to be honest, I don't know how we could have kept it any flatter. But if we were directed to reduce by 1%, and that was the mandate, we'd roll up our sleeves and figure out where we could hurt ourselves the least and do that.
You would have a can-do attitude, is what it sounds like.
Have a can-do. It would hurt us, but we would do it.
We need to go in that eyes wide open. That we are at a point where that is going to impact our services.
Oh, agreed. And I'd like to just point out here in this workshop, what was the thing that Chief, you told me? What was the status of your fire trucks and your apparatus? What did you say?
Less than desirable.
Less than desirable. I'm very aware of that. I think this budget has 3 trucks in it. We're not going to screw over fire or public safety. I just have to point out that we made our own hole over years and years to get to less than desirable. And these trucks are what, 1.8 million a piece, generally speaking, just for one.
On average, yes.
So, I mean, it's significant. The other thing I want to point out, and I'll drop this, is can we go back to the sheet that we had up? Second page, please, or next page. The 1.4 at the end of year amended budget that we had last year after all of the kerfuffle, and we're at 1.08. And so by the math, when I put this in Excel, that's 3.9 million. It's roughly $3.8 million. I mean, it's real money. Now, the part that I do see when we add up everything together, and it was in the transmittal letter, we're at 1.5% higher. I just want to point out, this is the math, this is the story. The numbers tell a story. It's 3.9 million, it's $4 million. Now, some of that is in different buckets, but at the departmental level, I'm just aware of it. I want to make sure we talk about it during the workshop. And I appreciate the people who have a can-do attitude if we need to go there. I'm not saying we need to go there. I haven't offered an amendment. I haven't even put a proposal out. I'm just saying this is what the math is today. So I appreciate the time of the staff, and I look forward to this discussion.
Any other questions or comments? Member Barry?
Yeah, thanks. Mine are just pretty simple. I have a general question about residential versus commercial. Do y'all have a general guideline on what percentage of our property taxes come from commercial versus residential?
We can put something together and have that available to you for the next meeting.
Swag. That's all I'm looking for, is just a rough estimate. And then I know that I'm not gonna belabor that here. The SROs, I'm aware that I know that we've had some legislation come down this past legislative session that's requiring some SRO support in all campuses. Where are we on that with the school district?
So I'll let the chief fill in the details that I missed, but we've had multiple meetings with the school district, with Superintendent Berger. They are going to use a combination of off-duty officers for security, and then we're at the point where our SRO program, the next thing we needed to add there was another sergeant. So that is in the budget to add that. And the school district, it's basically, we're working on an update to our agreement with the school district to where they'll reimburse us for basically 100% of those costs. We'll have to buy the equipment in the car and stuff up front, and then over the next 5 years, what they pay us will make up for that. But they'll be basically paying for that next position. That's what they're doing for this next year. I'm sure they're still evaluating how they handle that new law over the longer term. So that's where we are on that at this point.
The other thing is I'm not really sold on the whole UDC update. Just still not. We've had a UDC for a long time. Man, I would really hate. I mean, with all the problems we still have with people trying to build and stuff like that in the community, I would really hate to go and change it and have the whole entire department start to learn a whole different piece of software and an interpretation of what our new rules are and things of that sort. So I'm not saying I can't be convinced, but I'm still just really having a hard time with that.
So the intent of updating the UDC is to, it's not to just come in and wipe the slate clean and say, hey, here's a whole new set of rules everybody has to live by and learn and operate underneath. It's really to make what we do easier to understand for, whether it be our staff that is working with it, enforcing it, making sure it's clear, it's concise, and then making it easier for the development community to work through that as well. From a language standpoint, as well as how that document's interlinked. There's so many pieces of it that you get to a point that says, reference, 3.2.2.2 over in this other chapter, and you got to flip over there or, flip in your PDF, and to have that interlinked where you can just click on that. Now you see what that is. You can jump right back to where you were. So just user friendly. And maybe John, are there other aspects of it that we want to make sure we tackle when we do this that make things, the whole intent is make things easier, better, more understandable. But anything else to add?
Yes, sir. It's just about, there's confusing language. There's language that confuses developers, citizens, staff sometimes. And just to go through it, the idea is to put together a committee that includes residents, builders, developers with staff to help go through and work through it and make sure we can come up with a document that helps people get through stuff the first time, which get the information out there early so that when you're working through the process, it's not about, well, you didn't get this right, so here's your plans back, go back and do it again, that it's better understandable, better presentable, and easier to work with. And I think that's the goal. It's not to just say, okay, let's push this aside what we have and start over. I mean, a lot of what we do is Pearland's reached a certain level of build out. Changing all the rules isn't going to help us, right? It's just about going in there, making it more understandable, clarifying some things, and giving a document that's better usable to the development community, to the residents, and to staff.
So maybe something as simple as, it's still the foundation of the current UDC. It's just more of a software overlay to maybe help individuals or builders or contractors or whomever say, I want to go build on this piece of property. These are my guidelines, and so on, right?
Yeah, so it's basically just makes information easier to find. It connects information within the document easier. It's not even really a new software. It's just going to be taking, a searchable, usable PDF format, probably, right? It's something that allows somebody to go in there and say, okay, this is what I'm looking for. It's connected. It's easy to find, easy to use. And allows them to, save time and money, right? This is gonna allow residents, builders, developers work on their projects easier, save them time, save them money as they get into the process and work with us.
Member Barry, can I just ask John to that, and maybe to Josh, is that in the envelope of this kind of general communications overhaul as well to make sure that that's also included in kind of our.
Well, I know with the discussions with the 311, it is about how community development fits into that is important as well. So if people come in right now, we have our own staff. People call in and ask our questions. They go to somewhere else. So the idea is, I believe, as we look into this, to have it easier to provide information no matter what.
Yeah, because there are different. I'm just thinking, yes, developers and builders and stuff reach out, but sometimes also the small business owner will reach out as well. And I know there have been multiple instances over my 5 years here that the business owner will hear something said from the developer, the contractor, and it's just clearly not the case, but they're just making stuff up, and it's so difficult for them to come to the city and I think find that information to pinpoint. If we could include that as part of that kind of service brand overhaul, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Definitely.
I mean, I think we really need kind of, from council and community development, maybe workshop that whole idea, because I think to the person on this council, I think we all have different ideas on what we think that needs to look like. And we're all interfacing with the city, as is development and administration. But just to kind of get an idea of what really is, what you guys may see as user-friendly is not necessarily user-friendly to the layperson that's brand new to our community that says, hey, I want to go build a building, or I want to go build a home, or I want to go, do this, that, or the other, So I get it. And I think it might be worthwhile to consider something like that in the future.
Yeah, I think, one of the important things John covered is that we do plan to have a citizen and developer, committee that's a part of this revamp, so that we get that kind of input that, hey, this may make sense to you guys. You guys are city folks, you're planners, you're permitting folks, but it doesn't make sense to us. So how do we make sure it makes sense to everybody?
No, I get it. That's a good idea. And the last thing I have are the service funds allocations. We mentioned it a couple of times, and IT and facilities, again, aren't getting any love, so to speak, this year. And if I'm not mistaken, they're still at pretty much zero. So I'm concerned about that. We really need to figure out how we're going to build those service funds up, because earlier this year we had a presentation from a gentleman that came in that did an actual survey of our IT infrastructure, gave us a lot of recommendations on things that we needed. I think he suggested 17 new employees and so on and so forth, to the tune of about $25 million. So that number scares me. So I think we need to kind of figure out what we can do to start really generate or adding money to those funds, because I certainly do not want to see that in a bond. That's not going to be a good thing for me.
Absolutely, and I think from my perspective, this is the year that we get back to square one. Next year is where we've got to make that concerted effort to start to build those capital replacement funds in IT and facilities. Once we get into the internal service funds, you'll see we're doing a little bit this year, but it's being funded by just a little bit of funds we have in there. We're not building those funds yet, but the intent would be moving forward. Much like the motor pool fund, we start building those funds.
That's all I have, Mayor Pro Tem.
All right, Member Kamkar for a quick comment.
I just want to point out the UDC item was the first thing on the cut line. This budget boo-boo happened, and we come to these meetings a lot, workshops, amendments to development plans, all kinds of different items. And a lot of it is because some of the criteria, we're just not up to date. We're dealing with criteria that is out of date. And I think we had we had a full room discussion upstairs about the Old Town site, what we need for the future, and the UDC item of giving guidance was, I think, something people landed on. I'm not trying to say we shouldn't do it. I'm not trying to say it's not important. I'm just very aware that was the item that they have already given on that. And I do think over time, if there is a update on that, you will save on staff time. I think you will save on process time. I think we will have more clarity, and I think we will be a little bit more business friendly. And then for $300,000, that feels like a very minor investment, but I think has bigger tangible benefits. And so I only just want to say, I'm aware that they've done their bit. to get us over the hump, I do think it would have more benefits than 300,000. Just want to put that out there.
Well, and I think that that needs to be proven. So, and I think that's where all the communications with the committee John mentioned are going to go a long way. But at the end of the day, I'm all for making it easier to do business and move to Pearland, and whatever that takes, I'm all in, because I think sometimes for small businesses especially, and a larger percentage of small businesses, there are larger percentage of smaller businesses and larger businesses, and I think we focus on the larger businesses too much, and they have the resources to be able to hire people to actually dissect the UDCs and work with development and EDC and all these other organizations. But for the small business, I think it's imperative that we make it very simplistic for them to come to Pearland and open their business and get into business without, having multiple city council meetings, creating cups and all this other stuff. Now, they're valuable, but we just need to make it a lot easier for those businesses to come to Pearland and eliminate some of the hurdles we have today. So that's really where I was going with that. So thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
I wanted to just ask something Member Hernandez said about the step. Can you hear me?
Go ahead.
About the step payments to the police officers. Can you expand on that?
So was that the question about the folks that are topped out in the step plan and the lump sum? So Lorraine can run through exactly what we do there. We can provide some more information on that. One of the questions I have, maybe Lorraine can answer it on the spot, is we're also, when we do the market adjustment, we move the step plan along with that as well. So
is there a way to make
so when we move the step plan, they do gain the benefit of that, but then if they're still topped out, then they get that lump sum. So maybe you can describe how that works again.
That's correct. So on an annual basis, we formally call the COLA, we call it a market adjustment. And so for this year, the market adjustment we're putting on top of all of the plans is equal to 2%, which means anyone who was on those pay plans, regardless of status, will receive that 2% regardless. But with a step plan, there is a max in which they reach step 12 in PD. And for those who are at the step 12, that means there's no room for them to grow to a next step 13 because it doesn't exist. Meaning because that doesn't exist, we offer a 2% lump sum on their anniversary dates for those who are within the PD department. Everyone else outside of PD who reach the maximum receive a lump sum in October during the first payroll cycle.
So it's still fair.
That's correct.
So they get the benefit of the market increase, the 2% there, and then they get the lump sum on top of that as well.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much. And as for the UDC, I do question the confusion that will be involved with that. An idea of a workshop where we could really discuss this, I really do think that's a good idea. If we could have that at the beginning of one of our council meetings where we talk about the UDC specifically, I would really welcome that.
So I've kind of jotted down a note to, how do we build council input into the UDC update? And it may be a workshop. We may do it something like we do along the lines of, the Pearland Prosperity Plan type input, but we'll make sure, or what we've been doing recently with the EDC, maybe it's a joint meeting with the Planning and Zoning Commission, but we'll seek to, find a way to interject council input into that update for sure.
Bringing in outsiders to draft a whole new UDC when we have people.
There's not an intent to bring in outsiders to rewrite the UDC. It's to come in and help us, improve it to where it is more understandable, more user-friendly, and all those sort of things. And yeah, I think we've got to bring that capacity on to help us do that. If we were to try to set aside the time of our existing folks to do that, it's one of those things that just from the daily turning of the crank we have to do everything we do to get people through the process, through permits, through the zoning stuff, that would get backburnered and we'd never get there. I mean, and I want to get there. I want to get there to where it is easier and more user-friendly and a positive experience. And I think that's the quickest, best way to get there is with bringing in a consultant.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, any other questions, Member Carbone?
Yeah, thank you. So real quick, I gave several comments to you yesterday, Trent. Try not to hit on those again. I guess back on that slide 6, as my computer dies. You'd mentioned doing these COLAs along the way so we're not hit with this huge market adjustment. Can you provide a little bit more meat behind that at a future meeting as to, I guess, what you're seeing that the 2% market adjustment is going to keep us from having another several $1 million adjustment
Sure.
years out whenever we do the comp and class study again?
Okay. And maybe some historical, what we've done in between the last couple of comp and class studies and the results of that, and then what we're trying to accomplish here and what we're basing those numbers on. We can do that. Yes,
That'd
sir.
be helpful. Slide 13. So the jump here from what, 12.8 in 23 to 14.7 in 24. It's a $1.9 million bump. I don't see where we've got that broke out by county. So if we could see that, if we saw that last year, I'd love to say that everybody up here, at least one of us would have raised a flag, but it'd be nice to see that. I'm sure staff's looked at it, but if you could share that in a future round.
We have, and I kind of recognized very late in getting this prepared, we should have broken this down, but we'll have that broken down for the next meeting for sure.
Slide 45. I'm all in fan. We need to allocate the UDC funds, but I guess you got UDC and EDC sitting back there. So I don't know if John, if you can proverbially reach into Matt's pocket and Darren figure out how we can legally do that. I mean, it's both development. I think, not to get on a soapbox about EDC, but I think there'd be more economic benefit in the city of Pearland for this UDC rewrite than some of the stuff that's done. So I don't know if there's an opportunity there for Matt to help fund that, but I think that's going to help all the way from the largest business and contractors all the way down to, more importantly, the small business in Pearland. Then lastly, at some point last year, I think all the raw data was out there on the budget website, and I don't see it yet, so we can go through and do a pivot table on account departments and all that. So I guess we have any idea on when that will be published?
If you'd like, we can publish it in this next week.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you.
All right, any other questions or comments?
I'm all for that, Matt. Comment, Tony. Thank you.
All right, with that, turn it back over to Trent.
And I'm just going to hand it right back over to Rachel. We're on tax back. I think you got ahead of us, Josh. There we go.
Our tax-backed debt fund or debt service fund, this is the fund where the city budgets for the revenue and expenditures for all tax-backed debt. The expenditures in this fund pay for non-enterprise system or non-water sewer debt and mud rebates. And our property tax rate has two components, the O&M and the debt service rate. And this is the fund where the revenue from the debt service property tax rate goes. Our tax-backed debt is paid for by property taxes, and the primary driver of our tax-backed debt payments continues to be our capital improvement plan projects. So the fiscal year 24 proposed debt service rate is 33 cents with an estimated levy of $34.9 million, and the total tax revenue, including frozen values, is $41.9 million. There is $0 committed from fund balance, as our current state worksheet removes that need or possibility. Our debt service fund summary does reflect all of our revenues and expenditures, and we are, with the fiscal year 24 budget, over the 10% debt service fund policy minimum. We can pause here for any questions or comments if you like, or we can move along to internal service funds.
Any questions, comments, Member Kamkar?
We have some revised calculations in the budget book. We were going to be at like a 15% number, now we're at a 14% rate increase. What are those? We're in a drought. People are using water and whatnot. Are we anticipating a different or revised number as this proceeds, or do we anticipate that is, because you make notation in the book about that, so.
That is our enterprise fund, which I think we're 2 or 3 sections away from, but we can discuss that.
I apologize then. Sorry about that.
Any other questions or comments? With that, Rachel?
So we'll move on to our internal service funds, beginning with what our purpose for the internal service fund is, and it's to ensure the operating costs as well as our long-term liabilities, such as replacement costs, are accounted for as they relate to our fleet, IT, and facilities fund. It provides a source of funds for required and planned replacement of assets and helps account for the true cost of replacing those assets. It creates clarity about the true cost of delivering a program of work to maintain the operations and of those specific departments as well as their replacements, and it eliminates some of the predictability or unpredictability with revenue being available from general fund. So it decouples the replacement needs from what may or may not be available in the general fund in any given year. Our successes, our motor pool fund was implemented in 2019, and we've gone from 0% of vehicles covered by lease fees in 2019 to an estimated 42% at the end of fiscal year 24. Our TERS Broadway allocation money in the motor pool fund balance was utilized this year to fund the general fund vehicle replacements, as well as replace up to 3 fire heavy apparatus trucks. And we were able to, with the fiscal year 24 budget, restore the general fund lease payments to the motor pool based upon the updated replacement criteria. Our motor pool fund is in existence to provide for the maintenance and replacement of the city's vehicles and rolling stock that has an approximate value of $33.8 million. The city continues to take a phased approach to fully funding the motor pool fund. We started with vehicle maintenance and annual replacements in fiscal year 19, and lease fees begin on vehicles the fiscal year after the vehicle is received. And if the proposed budget is approved, the city will end fiscal year 24 with 42% of vehicles covered by lease fees. Reflected here in the capital outlay are all the vehicle replacements budgeted for fiscal year 24, which does include enterprise fund, general fund, and the 3 fire trucks mentioned. And in the transfers outline here, that now reflects the transfer of the lease fees already paid to the capital fund. Our facilities fund, the facilities fund is to provide for building related repair and maintenance, as well as equipment maintenance and capital replacement for asset recapitalization, as well as janitorial services. It is modeled after the successfully implemented motor pool fund, and the goal is to be funded on a building department cost basis. However, currently, based off of the data we have, we fund via transfer based off of the FTEs by fund. Fiscal year 24's budget includes the cost of the phase 2 generator heater enclosures, and we were unable to fund capital lease fees for fiscal year 24. All costs reflected in this fund relate to operations and maintenance of existing facilities. The Information Technology Fund is to provide for the maintenance and replacement of the city's current and future technology needs. It includes 21 full-time employees, same as last year. It is also modeled after our successfully implemented motor pool fund, and costs are allocated to departments based off of their actual usage. So we have both citywide software and department software, and those are charged to the departments based off of usage. In fiscal year 24, we're beginning year 1 of 3 for the replacement of IT switches, and we were also unable to phase in capital lease fees for this fiscal year. New in fiscal year 24 is the capital fund. This fund will hold the capital lease fees paid for our internal service fund replacements until such a time as the budgeted replacements occur. This will help us decouple our operational costs and our capital replacement costs. And this year it contains only the motor pool lease fees. These are all the motor pool lease fees paid since the fund was instituted. The first vehicles scheduled to be replaced based off of lease fees paid are anticipated in fiscal year 25. When phased in, this fund will also hold the capital lease fees for facilities in the IT funds. An additional internal service fund includes our risk management fund, and this is for our real and personal property as well as workers' compensation. This year, it is estimated that our real personal property is $349 million. Our premiums for fiscal year 24 total $3.5 million, which is an increase of $1.4 million from the fiscal year 23 adopted. So we first saw those increases with fiscal year 23 projections, and we saw further increases for the fiscal year 24 proposed budget. So based off of those increases, the fund is projected to end fiscal year 24 at a positive fund balance of $502,000, but it is beneath our fund target minimum policy reserve of $1 million. We are anticipating building that fund balance back up over the next few fiscal years. And then our final internal service fund is our medical self-insurance fund. Estimated claims are $9.2 million for next year with administration fees of $1.6. And our ending fund balance for fiscal year 24 will be 1% below 25%, which is our target fund balance. This was the result of a discrepancy between some fiscal year 22 numbers between us and HUB. Our numbers are correct, and we will work to bring that fund balance back up to 25% also. We have some internal service fund supplementals that were also funded, and that includes the replacement vehicles for general fund, which is approximately $500,000. Our enterprise fund replacement vehicles funded directly from the enterprise fund are about 1.0. And then we have budgeted 3 fire heavy apparatus replacements at 4.5. And in our facilities fund, we have phase 2 of the generator heater enclosures at $144,000, and the IT switches in the information technology fund as about $275,000.
All right, with that, any questions or comments from council? Member Hernandez.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I need to actually go back because, Lorraine, I'm sorry. We're still having some ambiguity here in our understanding of the steps. So can we just pull that slide back up? What was it, 6? I don't know. It's the most popular slide ever. Just really trying to get, okay, so if you go from step 1 to step 2 or step 2 to step 3, you're saying that's 3% for the civil service employees, correct? Okay. And then there's a market adjustment that's built in to each one of those steps. So if I stayed at the step I'm at, I would still get 2%. But if I'm moving from step 1 to step 2, I'm getting 3%, but then also built into that is a 2% over the previous year, correct?
For a total of 5%.
For a total of 5%. But on the last part, non-exempt employees at their max step will receive 2% as of their base salary, but then also that step you're saying then includes also a COLA of 2%. So they're getting a 2% adjustment for cost of living, and then they're also getting a 2%, we'll call it a bonus as well.
So it's a combination. For those who are maxed out, will get the one-time payment. For those who are not maxed out, they would get the 2% market adjustment plus the 2% advancement for a total of 4%. For those who are maxed out, will get the market adjustment of the 2%, but on top of that, they would get a 2% lump sum check issued to them.
So it is like 4%.
That's correct.
Okay. All right, I think we understand now. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right, Member Kamkar?
Yes. Can we go to, just had it up. Sorry. Want to be at slide 58 here, but I'd like to have a real higher level discussion on the budget for a second. On transfers in from the general fund, these are some of the funds that are receiving some of those transfers. Then there's obviously the special, there's like 20 other special funds further on. From an accounting point of view of how we're notating this from general fund to here, we have 4.3 million, roughly speaking. Then I see our motor pool fund has transfers in of 5.6. I'm probably screwing this up, but I just want to understand the interaction between the general fund transfers going to these and how to identify that. Is it at the departmental level, like police and fire are sending in theory a check, so to speak?
So we're accounting for it on a vehicle by vehicle basis. So yes, if a vehicle, a patrol vehicle is going to have a different, annualized replacement cost than a dump truck. And so that's determined, and then that's the number that's allocated from the fire or the police department for the number of patrol vehicles that they have in the motor pool fund. This number, the transfer in, would also include your transfer in from the enterprise fund and for their vehicles as well.
So let me ask a stupid question here. I'm trying to get educated on this.
Sure.
So the funds sending dollars back to the general fund, in this instance, is an expenditure or either a transfer out or a capital outlay to go back to the general fund to reimburse. Is that essentially?
So we do the capital outlays directly in motor pool. So we buy the vehicles out of motor pool. So that's the capital outlays here.
That's correct. So the capital outlay is directly takes place in the motor pool fund. If there's typically if there's a new vehicle or a replacement vehicle, those costs are also reflected as a transfer in from those funds. So for example, for the SRO officer, there's a transfer in or transfer out from general fund in the school resources division to the motor pool fund, and then the expense is reflected in the capital outlay account in the motor pool fund.
Okay. So in theory, departmental level in the general fund, dollars go in and they get spit back out as they're incurred, or I think you have a policy here of a year after those go. Okay. All right. Excuse me. On the capital outlay here on the motor pool fund, the 6.9, 4.5 of that is the fire chief's 3 apparatus. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And of that 4.5, those were identified as supplemental items at the end of FY23, or are those anticipatory supplementals 6 months from now?
They were included as part of the fiscal year 24 proposed supplemental process, and also part of our heavy apparatus replacement plan that we've been working on.
So from a timing point of view, we had the big boo-boo, and we were, February or January? Then we made those adjustments, and at that point in February, we bought or ordered $4.5 million in trucks.
No. So last year, we bought the trucks that are on order right now with ARPA funds. And then we had, I believe, a mid-year allocation in FY22 for the third. So that was the first one we got on order. Then we got 2 more on order in FY23 with an ARPA allocation. We haven't ordered or done anything since those 3. These are 3 new additional proposed heavy apparatus to purchase that would be purchased in October thereabouts if they are approved as part of this budget.
They're, in this case, coming out of the 16.7 million net position from last year, and we're deducting out of this fund.
Correct. So several years ago, when the city built Broadway west of, I think it was Kingsley or Kirby, all the way to 521. We built some portion of that road, and that was in the TERS. So we received a TERS reimbursement a handful of years ago, and to try to help accelerate the implementation of the motor pool fund, we put those dollars into the motor pool, and we've allocated a piece of that just about every year. And so we still have some of that in there that we're able to expend and go ahead and get these large purchases completed.
Got it. And then for the 5.6 on the revenues, that's the general fund sending dollars into the motor pool. And right now, they're aggregated up for the entire general fund, but in theory, they could be at the police, fire, parks, rec, IT, whatever their allocations for vehicles.
General fund plus enterprise fund, but yes, that's, and he was asking when you stepped out, like how we allocate that to each department, and each department pays in, correct?
Sure. So there's actually a couple different transfers going on here. There are the transfers in for the lease payments, which are if we replace a vehicle based off its estimated replacement cycle, we charge the department's lease fees over the estimated lifetime of the vehicle, so that when it's ready for replacement, we have the money. And then there's also a repair and maintenance transfer that is assigned out to all divisions to pay for the operations component of this fund. There's personnel and the actual repair and maintenance line item. That's charged or assessed to departments based off of the current fiscal year's repair and maintenance usage. So we get a report from the fleet fund that says 50% of our repair and maintenance this year is attributable to, just as an example, fire operations. So then they pay 50% of the proposed operations cost in the next year.
So let me ask a question a different way. So if we wanted to make that number go from 5.6 to 4.2 at the departmental level within the general fund, in theory, we just don't show an expenditure of a transfer out.
Well, we show, as mentioned, we show the two different transfer outs, one for the repair and maintenance and one for the lease fees. So yes, again, we would just have to reflect that we were not paying one of those transfers.
I'm talking internal plumbing. I'm just talking plumbing right now.
Yeah.
And so
you couldn't really do that on the operating side because you've got to pay for gas and repairs anyway. And last year, that's what we did with the lease payments. When we made the adjustment to the budget, we took that 1.3 and didn't make that payment into the motor pool.
Okay.
So if you take either one of those away, one, you're taking away from being able to operate your fleet. Right. Two, you're taking away from being able to replace your fleet when it's ready to be replaced.
The savings piece. Okay. I appreciate the enlightenment on that. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions, comments? Member Hernandez?
Thank you. I just wanted to, real quickly, what is the increase from this year to next year on the 42% coverage? Yeah, percentage-wise, just roughly.
So that's the increased number. Oh, I believe it was 39%. We're not seeing a very large increase because we actually were not able to order vehicles in fiscal year 23 so far. So none of those not ordered vehicles will be paying lease fees until they're in service.
Do we know what the timeline is, Trent, to get to, I mean, what is our policy goal? Is it 100%, I'm assuming?
Fully funded.
Yeah.
Yes, 100%.
And do we know what timeline is there?
We've run some scenarios, and I mean, so part of that is you've got vehicles that have very long lives. You've got dump trucks, you've got fire trucks that aren't in the pool because they were purchased before we started the pool. And so it won't be until, they reach the end of their life and we replace them that we put that vehicle in the pool. So, there will be some stragglers that run out for quite some time.
So it's incremental, but it's not necessarily like a year-over-year static increment.
No, I mean, it's really subject to what are we able to, in the general fund especially, what we're able to afford that year to bring, to replace that's not already in the pool. We will likely start replacing some vehicles that are in the pool, especially patrol vehicles that do have heavy use and need to be cycled out. Our schedule now is every 6 years. We'll have patrol vehicles we're cycling out and paying for out of the motor pool before we have all the other vehicles even in the motor pool.
Okay. Well, I'm just glad it's a roughly, I think, 3% increase. I'm just happy there's an increase period. So
Yeah, and that'll fluctuate.
Yeah.
Depending on what we do each year.
Okay. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? All right, with that, Rachel, Brent?
So next we'll transition to our special revenue funds. We have here a summary of all of our special revenue funds and their proposed revenues and expenditures, but we're just gonna hit a few of them in the next few slides, starting with our Hotel, Motel, or Convention and Visitors Bureau Fund. So the reason that we're drawing attention to this fund this year is that we have a planned expenditure in fiscal year 24 related to building restrooms at Centennial Park. A permissible use of funds does include sports facilities improvements. So included in the fiscal year 24 budget is a transfer of $586,000 to the capital improvement funds to build additional restrooms at Centennial Park. This is contingent on meeting the requirements to host 10 regional, state, or national championship sporting events in the prior year. And so we expect to hit this milestone by the end of calendar year 2023, thus allowing us to spend the funds. And then there are also requirements for revenue over the next 5 years that we'll be monitoring. Our Drainage Maintenance Fund is now in year 2 of operations, and the Drainage Maintenance Fund does reflect the additional $125,000 transfer anticipated in fiscal year 24. It will include the following scope of work: cleaning, continued enclosed system inspections of 33 miles annually, continued survey and grading of open drainage systems of 14 miles annually, to continue monitoring of drainage maintenance in year 2 to meet the intent of the strategic priority milestone. We are onboarding a stormwater inspector as necessary to meet the following system requirements: inspecting the city's drainage system and 326 detention facilities, as well as compliance with the municipal separate storm sewer or MS4 TCEQ permit requirements. The Infrastructure Reinvestment Fund does reflect the reduced transfer of $1.3 million from the general fund. Their operations is $1.7 million, and it will complete fiscal year 24 will include the completion of the annual pavement condition survey, which will set our basis for future budget needs, and program street restoration beginning into fiscal year 25. The scope of work budgeted for continues sidewalk rehabilitation programs, and it meets and awards all contractual obligations in fiscal year 24 with Brazoria County. I'm happy to take any questions or requests for additional information concerning the special revenue funds.
Any questions, comments here? Member Carbone?
Yep, thank you. So on the Drainage Maintenance Fund, the transfers in of 2.09, if you go back one more slide, is that all from the general fund, or is some of that coming from?
That is all from the general fund.
So if you'll recall, when we set the drainage fund up, we had a certain amount of dollars going into drainage in the general fund every year already. And then we did, council passed that resolution to add, I think it was $600 and something thousand to the FY23 budget, and another $125,000 to the 24 budget. And that's what makes up the transfer in.
Is there not any ability to look at the miles that we're going to maintain this year to see if any of that's from prior EDC projects?
So we did the analysis last year on the drainage infrastructure built by the EDC over the years, and we developed a percentage of that the EDC would transfer into the general fund annually for their share of the maintenance of the drainage system, and that transfer is included in this year's budget, correct?
So we're transferring from the EDC to the general fund, then from the general fund to drainage maintenance?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do we have to flow that through the general fund?
Do we have to flow that through the general fund?
You don't have to answer it now, but I guess in the future, it'd be nice to look at this slide and say, hey, of the 2.09, 1.8 was from the general fund and the balance was from EDC.
We'll look at that. It won't be near that much money, but it will.
Yeah.
Sure. No, that I understand where that'll give us some clarity on where it's coming from. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Member Hernandez?
Thank you. I was very happy to see, it wasn't on this, but I think the memo that we got the other day from Tracy that the STR revenues seemed to be coming in pretty steadily, but I didn't see a breakdown of that. Do you know, Tracy, is that from what number of properties, or do we have like a couple like big generators in the city, or how is that broken down?
That's something I can provide you detail with by collaborating with Vance and his team on what we're actually seeing with the permits issued as opposed to the income coming in.
Okay, and then in addition to just the restrooms, would signage be an eligible expenditure as well? Because I mean, if people going to parks, I would love to see some of our educational signage upgrades just kind of knocked out, particularly at Centennial. I know we've done some improvements there, but it would be nice to do that as well. Maybe for future, I'm just asking if it's eligible.
Wayfinding signage is an eligible use of hot funds, so we need to look at your specific request and how that would align with the allowable use.
Okay. And the last thing, I just want to say thanks to Darren and Trent. Well, not Darren, casual Darren. I like this look. Or I know I sent y'all a lot of questions about sidewalk funding and things like that. And y'all gave me really, really thorough answers and very candid answers. So I appreciate y'all's time there. That's all I've got. Thank you.
Any other questions? Member Kamkar.
Thank you, sir. Can we go to slide 67? Please. It's fuzzy here. Maybe it's 69. It's the CBB slide. Go back one more. There we go. This fund is, how do we get dollars in here?
This is from the hotel motel occupancy taxes and also the short-term rental occupancy taxes.
So this is sitting in a bank somewhere. This isn't on an accounting ledger. This is real money.
Yes.
Okay. So do we have like a plan? Like this balance seems to continue to expand. I think when I first got on the council 4 years ago, it was like just south of 5 million, and now it's 7.2, and it's becoming ever larger.
So, as we went through discussions over potential mixed-use facility with a potential convention center and all those sort of things, this was going to be one of the sources of revenue for that. It still has the potential for that in the future, but without anything, impending, that's why we started looking at what are the other avenues for spending some of these dollars, and they're very restricted.
Sure.
And that's why we're seeing what we're working on for Centennial Park, because we did find that we are going to meet the threshold for being able to use those for capital expenditures for park improvements. There are metrics we have to meet over the next few years to show that we have a return on that investment. We believe we'll meet that. If we don't, we'll supplement it with some park development funds. But we're going to continue to seek other opportunities of how to use these funds as we grow our tournament portfolio. If there's other opportunities there, we'll look at those. And then, of course, if we have a project come back that's eligible for these funds, we'll have a fair amount of funds available for that.
Trent, do I recall that you guys use this as part of the softball field rehab at Shadow Creek? Am I misremembering? I think we talked about that when they had that big tournament come in.
I don't think we met the threshold for tournaments at that point.
We didn't use hot funds for the turf project specifically at Shadow Creek Ranch. I believe that came from the TERS
Yeah, so we funded that with the TERS reimbursable funds. At that point, and probably still to this point on those we're getting to the point, actually, that's how we're doing Centennial Park. At that point, we didn't have enough of the qualifying tournaments to be able to do that from hot taxes. Now we do, or we expect to by the end of this year. And so now we have that opportunity to spend those funds. We did a pretty extensive discussion with some experts in this area just a month and a half ago with Tracy and myself and Ron, and I think we had legal with us as well, just to understand all the ins and outs and the avenues to be able to use these funds and employ and allocate these funds where we can. So that's where we made the move towards Centennial Park this year. It fits the bill, so we'll continue to look for those opportunities. And
I would like to see, this is not the time, but just more refined proposals on this. I mean, we're going to pound each other on the general fund for the next month and a half, and this thing just keeps expanding like a bloated balloon. So, but all right, thank you.
Trent, one question on that, our train depot out here, is that something that money can be expended from this?
Tracy, hot taxes to be able to use on the train depot. I mean, so the phase one of that we did with PEG funds, because we're going to be using that for communications group. And I think we got some of those funds allocated for phase two. But Tracy, would that be an eligible expenditure?
Because I thought I read somewhere over the last year where that is an expenditure. They could.
There's some restrictions on how that could be used for historical purposes, and the caveat is that it would have to drive visitation and have that tourism component, which is why we weren't able to do it for the first phase.
Okay. There's a provision in the tax code that allows it if it's like she said, there's a tourism component, it's a visitor center or something of that nature, which is currently not the case. And so right now that visitor component would be missing to allow us to be able to use the CVB monies.
What about for the Old Town master plan update?
For the master plan update, I don't believe that would be eligible. I think one of the things we can do is we can come back with, with some more details on the parameters, what the law says, what the parameters are, and what can be spent, and what the implications are of that, and then kind of put together what a 5-year plan may look like, and have a deeper discussion on that in the future. It's very restricted what you can use these funds on, but we can have a deeper dive in that in the future.
Question, so we're using this in a park. Can we use this in other parks?
Can we use this in other parks? So the reason we can use it in this park is because by the end of this year, we will have hosted 10 qualifying softball tournaments. So then we can make capital improvements to the softball component of that park. And then what we have to do after that is we have to monitor for 5 years our room night revenues that we can attribute to future tournaments. And over 5 years, we have to generate that much room night revenue for those tournaments to pay for that $500 and something thousand. If we fall short of that, we'll have to supplement that with park development funds. So it's very restricted in how you use it, and then you got to be able to prove up the return on investment moving forward. But like I said, we can have a deeper dive into this and what the restrictions are, what the options are moving forward. I think. And then we can put together a longer term plan on what we can spend these funds on.
All right, any other questions, comments? Back to Rachel or Trent.
I'm just going to kick this one off real quick if we can jump to the next. So EDC fund is our component fund, and I just wanted to we've talked a little bit about it, but set some framework that's a little bit outside this budget, but part of this budget is that as we talked about a few minutes ago, the EDC is now paying for their share of drainage maintenance for drainage infrastructure that the EDC has built since its inception. On your council agenda for this coming Monday night, we've got a couple of things in there that I think is also looking to target some infrastructure and some improvements and help the city on our side of the budget by allocating some EDC funds for uses that they're eligible for. So the first one on Monday night's meeting is the resolution to target 20% of EDC revenues every year to go towards targeted infrastructure projects. And we've already got a 5-year plan on what those projects are. You've seen those. There are a lot of road and drainage infrastructure improvements in areas where it'll support economic development. Those are projects that otherwise the city would have had to fund. So 20% of the EDC revenues going towards those infrastructure projects. And then the other item that's on there for the Monday night is that the EDC would pay for the Hickory Slough Sportsplex, the soccer and lacrosse and field sports complex improvements that were part of this last bond program. So instead of the city selling those 17-point-something million of bonds, the EDC is going to fund that $17 million. And then what that does, very similar to the drainage maintenance that we're doing with EDC dollars, once the EDC has paid for those capital investments, they are able to support the maintenance of those investments as well. So part of that a reimbursement agreement on the Hickory Slough Sportsplex will also include, when the project is completed, the EDC paying, I think it's $284,000 for equipment to maintain that facility, and then also they will be able to pay for 82% of the ongoing maintenance of that facility, which is about, we'll start in around the $380,000 range, and then it'll be 82% as we move forward. So just a couple of things of, things that are in the works and have been in the works associated with the EDC fund and how we're, working with the EDC to take on some of these costs that the city has, so that we're easing some of the burden on the general fund. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Rachel to go through the EDC fund.
Trent, can I ask you a question about it's just about the soccer fields? When
Hold on, just let her finish and then you come back to it.
Okay. I'm not sure if there's a following slide. Yeah. I think Trent nicely summarized the program of work that the EDC is completing this next year. They have excellent revenue that outstrip their expenditures, and then we'll end with a positive fund balance.
All right, that it, Rachel? Hold on real quick. Matt, I would like to say thank you very much for your participation and the board's participation this past year. Y'all stepped up and really worked with us and helped in areas on different items that we've come up with, and it's appreciated. So with that, I'd like to pass it on. Go ahead.
When we were talking about the soccer fields, wasn't there a disparity on how much the teams were paying? Something.
So I know we're in conversations with the major league, the major sports leagues that use that facility right now, and so Carrie may be able to give us a little bit of insight as to what we're working on there. But I know we're having ongoing conversations with them about how our agreements look going forward. But Carrie, you want to give some insight as to where we are and where we're going?
Sure, absolutely. At Hickory Slough Sportsplex, we have Shadow Creek Soccer is one of our primary users, Ling Ling, and Pilax, Pearland Youth Lacrosse, that utilize that facility. They operate under a registered sports association agreement, and according to that agreement that we have right now, they pay $10 per player per season. We are working with all of our organizations to update our policies. We're looking forward into the next 2 years. So once all 12 fields are built, that's when we'll transition into some new policies. And then that will fall under a different pricing structure as well.
Hasn't it been that for a very long time?
Yes. It's time to redo those. We are we've invested a lot in our athletic complexes over the last 7 to 10 years. And it's time to look at where we're going in the future with those.
And you said that will change in the next 2 years?
Yes, that's our goal, is to roll the new policies out once the Phase 2 renovations are complete.
It can't happen sooner than that?
Because of the number of fields and the amount of use that will happen, it could, but then it would change again at that point because we'll be building regular fields, turf fields. And so that's why we're already into this year. So we're looking at just updating those when the new complex is finished or when the second phase is finished.
You know, there's a lot of things that go into that as well in those agreements because, you know, the impetus behind those is that since we don't run our own recreational leagues, that when they run recreational leagues, we don't charge a large amount for them to use our facilities. It's when they are running their other leagues on there that we want to, you know, bring in more revenue, and so that's part of that conversation. And then periodically, they've also contributed to significant maintenance of those fields over the years as well. So that's always a component of that as well. If they're, you know, coming in and what are some of the things they've done? They resodded some of the fields at one point, I believe. So when they're making those kind of expenditures, you know, that's part of the equation of what do you charge these folks as well. So I think moving forward, you know, we want to get those to where they're cleaner and they're a little bit more of a, we understand the steady revenue and how they support our operations as well. Anything else to add?
No, that pretty much summarizes it.
Just as much as we've spent, that's a really low cost. That's all I wanted to add. Thank you.
To add to what Member Cade was saying, I'm always a fan of an incremental approach, especially with fees. So that way, if we do update it later and it's a big jump, I would rather kind of ease people into that. So if we do anticipate that it's going to be pretty major, and it sounds like it's been this fee for a long time, and I don't know what the new model is going to be, if it's going to be the same kind of per year fee, or if it's going to be maybe based on the number of times they actually use the fields or something. But I would prefer there to be some movement now just to kind of ease people into the increase versus just waiting and bam, here you go. Like we've done. Yeah. So, I mean, that would be my feedback on that. Thank you.
Carrie, are those fees set by the actual agreement or are they set in our fee, our non-development fee structure?
Those are adopted by council in our fee schedule.
I mean, as we adopt that moving forward, we can look at that and bring some recommendations back over the next couple of weeks.
Really quickly on what is the name of those agreements that produce that revenue for the park on those sports leagues, RSA?
Registered Sports Associations.
Yeah. So, and how would those revenues flow in? Where do those show up in our book? Where would that be?
So those are under the Parks and Recreation revenues. There are line items for Centennial Park. Let me look.
And I didn't mean to throw you hard
No, that's
on
okay.
that.
We have them broken out by different complex. So you'll have your Hickory Slough revenue, Centennial Parks revenue, and they're broken out by registered sports associations versus general field rentals.
I just want to have a very elaborate discussion here for about a minute. The reason that $17 million item got on there was because this room got filled up with soccer people. Literally, the meeting that we had this, it was with 1 week's notice, and that pushed other items in the CIP down, important items, drainage items. The chief still doesn't have his damn police academy range or any of his other stuff he needs. Those people showed up and they yelled at us and told us we needed this for the future of the city. And they have been getting a sweetheart deal for years on end. And I am not going to let a contract for $17.3 million for any improvements to Hickory Slough until those guys decide to fast walk that agreement. I'm going to slow walk. If they want to slow walk their dollars in, I'm going to slow walk their projects. It's just not fair. I'm pounding on the fire chief, I'm pounding on the police chief for dollars, and those guys have been getting a sweetheart deal. And as much as I love the kids, I truly do, there are priorities on the list much, much higher. Those guys need to know that this is serious, come up with a number that is equitable, and let's get it on with it. It's just not going to fly. Because I'm going to pound on those guys for a while. It's just not fair. So just please pass the message along to the other side that that agreement needs to show up sooner, needs to be signed, and let's get on with it. It's really not fair. I know the voters voted for it, but you know what? It could be the item in the 5th year of the CIP, not next year or the year thereafter. Not feeling really friendly about that. So just, I'd like that message to be passed along where it needs to be. Thank you.
With that, any other questions, comments? All right, back to Trent or Rachel.
So we will finish with our enterprise fund, which includes, sure.
Sorry, don't mean to interrupt, Rachel, but just wanted to, remind everybody, the big move here over this past year is that we did separate our engineering and public works group from our utilities group. So we now have a separate utilities department with a sole focus on delivering, quality water, treating our wastewater, and with a focus on the long-term maintenance and operations of all those very expensive infrastructure, and making sure that we're operating an efficient system. So with that, we'll jump into the enterprise fund.
Okay, so this next slide includes our expenditures for our operations and our debt fund in the water and sewer system. Similar to the other slide, we'll add totals to this. So what is driving our enterprise debt fund expenditure growth in the system, which is behind our rate? As you know, we're finishing our surface water plant phase 1, which was $175.5 million in debt, and then we'll be going into operations fully in this next fiscal year. Phase 2 of that project is $57.9 million and slated to begin in fiscal year 26. Additional capital improvement projects include the JHEC Water Reclamation Facility expansion, the Bailey Water Plant improvements, Berry Rose Water Reclamation Facility replacement and expansion in tandem with the Longwood Facility Reclamation Facility decommissioning. So these are all critical capital improvement plans. They all have been planned for. We've included them in previous CIP years. They'll be continued in the capital improvement plan we'll bring you in these next few weeks. They are required to meet state permitting requirements for system capacity. They're approved by council in one form or another, and usually several times before they're fully adopted. We build all these large capital improvement plans and all capital improvement plans into our rate model, and we include them in our CIP and multi-year projections. So the revenue changes for fiscal year 24, we're required to bring in enough revenue through our system to pay for debt and operations. Increased consumption helps to a minor extent, but rate increases are the primary way we bring in any additional revenue. When we sell COs, we agree that we have a bond coverage ratio of 1.15, which is a decrease from our former revenue bonds, and our enterprise operating fund balance must remain above 15%. So a 14% rate increase is proposed in the fiscal year 24 budget, which will impact the average household using approximately 6,000 gallons of water per month. They will pay an additional $12.40 more a month. So our 14% rate increase proposed in fiscal year 24 is down from a projected 16% rate increase with last year's budget forecast. Here we can see the history of Pearland rate increases. What does that 14% mean? We have some sample bills on the next page. As stated, between the water and sewer increase, the average residential user using $6,000 will see an increase of $12.40. The comparison bills citywide for our residential bills, we're not changing our position very much. We reached out to a number of other cities and municipalities to get what their water rate increases are. So if we knew them, they are reflected in the sample bill. So the average residential user will see a bill of $101. The fast food restaurant will see that same 14% increase, and we can see that here Pearland's proposed rates are at the higher rates for water and sewer among fast food restaurants. Our proposed enterprise operating fund is seeing a $5.9 million increase from the fiscal year 23 adopted. This reflects the first full year of operations of the surface water plant, including their staff, chemicals, and water purchases, as well as the full year of the previously added water quality team. And we should add 3 additional positions in the Utilities Administrative Division. The debt service fund does reflect some operational increases, and they are paid for by a transfer in from the enterprise operating fund. And the enterprise fund operations budget transfer increase to debt service is a $2.2 million increase. The operating fund also pays a transfer to our general fund debt service for mud rebates, and that did also go up this year. So our projects require debt to pay for construction, and Pearland has already issued that debt and or will be issuing that debt going forward, and so we do continue to have to pay for it. The capital projects that are approved through the CIP process are necessary and required to expand the supply of water to meet our current and future demands, as well as renew our wastewater treatment capacity to meet state capacity requirements, maintain our existing system and supply of water to treat wastewater for our residents and businesses, and we ensure that our federal and state regulations are followed and that the water we supply to our residents is safe and of a high quality. The CIP projects that we highlighted at the beginning are some of the largest in city's history, and they set us up for long-term success in our water and sewer program. You can go to the next slide. Some options previously enacted to control our utility rates do include switching from water sewer revenue bonds to the certificates of obligation. Because it has that lower bond coverage ratio requirement, we've moved to structured debt. We approved right sizing of reserve requirements in the enterprise operating fund and enterprise debt fund. Reworked the fiscal year 23 CIP to lower the rate pressure on the future years. We've updated the impact fee in fiscal year 23, and we validated our rate model with an outside consultant at the end of fiscal year 22. So the formula to meet our bond coverage ratio is shown here. So as you can see, based upon our fiscal year 24 rate increase, we are meeting that requirement of 1.16, which is just minimally above the requirement of 1.15, and this is the controlling factor for our fiscal year 24 proposed rate increase. The enterprise operating fund is also required to maintain a reserve of 15%, and we do currently do this. This is not the driving factor for the fiscal year 24 change, but it is the driving factor for our proposed future changes that we're projecting here. So here is our enterprise fund operating fund income statement. It does show that our expenditures are over our revenue for fiscal year 24 proposed budget, and this reflects all operating costs, including the debt transfer and transfer for the MUD payment, as well as a transfer for insurance. The risk fund is also included. We do meet all of our ratios of 1.16. And this is the debt fund income statement, which reflects all of our principal and interest payments projected for fiscal year 2024. The current year rate model does show the 14% increase that we're proposing for this year, and I would like to draw your attention to future years, as those 17% projected increases are also a decrease from our prior rate model, which was anticipating a necessary 19% increase in fiscal year 25, and I believe similar increase in fiscal year 2026. As you look towards the bottom, towards those bond coverage ratios, you can see that that is the driving factor this year, but beginning in fiscal year 25, we'll be transitioning to our working capital or cash reserve ratio, which we must maintain at 15% or higher. So there are 4 utility supplementals for sustainable infrastructure that were included in this year's budget. As Trent mentioned, we have split our engineering and public works department into a utility-specific administration division, so the staff got realigned in that process. So proposed for fiscal year '24 includes 3 new FTEs in the utilities fund. These are the only positions being added: a management assistant, a business administrator, and an environmental health and safety coordinator. Additionally, there's $50,000 for an asset management consultant in the utilities administration division. I'll take any questions.
Any questions, comments? Member Carbone?
No, thank you. I know we talked yesterday, Trent, but with the current drought and selling more water, we're in the business of selling water, do we anticipate any additional changes to this over the next month, 2 months?
We're usually we're billing now just 15 days in arrears, but we're still that comes in a little bit after where we are, and we typically try not to budget based on the weather of any particular year. We can take a look at that over the next month and see if there's anything there, just based on where we've gotten to this point versus the amended budget for FY23, but we just did that amendment, so we're pretty close to where we think it will be. But we can take a look.
And I'd be interested just to see the numbers, not necessarily if we're going to move the rate, but maybe that'll give us some future rate relief and out.
Sure, and I'm glad you brought that up, because that's key. There is that every time we push the rate down in the year we're adopting, we're usually seeing it pop up further and having you're kicking the can down the road. By adopting this at this point now, that just helps us down the road.
Member Kamkar?
Thank you, sir. I'm going to slide 89 on the deck. Sorry, the next one. It's on the 89 on my paper one. I think it would be helpful in the further discussion of where we would be today, the current as opposed to the proposed.
So we're on there today. So the one that's
there it is. I didn't see it.
Yeah, so that's there. And I'm glad you brought this one up. I wanted to make a comment is that in having conversations with many other cities and what they're looking at from a budget standpoint this year, many of them are they're looking at the same thing we are. In discussions with our city managers group, there's cities that are looking at 10-year increases for the next 5 years. There's cities that are looking at 10 years of 8% increases. It's the growth coupled with, I think, everybody's infrastructure's got a similar age on it that ours does, and they're having to renew that, and so it's really putting a lot of pressure on everybody's rates. So we're not an anomaly, I guess, is what I'm trying to convey based on what we're hearing from other cities, and you see it in the newspaper. What Houston's had to do, what some of the other cities have had to do to catch their rates up to pay for their systems as well.
Then can we go to slide 93 on this page, the one that had the options to reduce pressure?
So these are things we've already done.
Sure.
Yes, sir.
On the impact fees, where does that roll into our revenue piece? Like, where do we see that in the big roll up on the business plan?
So the impact fees are actually received into specific funds that are not a part of our enterprise fund, and then we do a transfer in both to our enterprise fund and to our debt service fund to pay for eligible expenses related to CIP projects that were outlined in those impact fee studies. It is a complicated calculation of what debt we've issued that is eligible to be reimbursed by impact fees, and that's how we determine what's coming into the enterprise fund.
And it's done that way based on the law that surround impact fees and what is eligible and what is not, and that your study has to include that. So that's why it has to go through that kind of process to determine how you allocate those.
And on slide, I guess it's 96 or 97, we have transfers in as one of those revenue items. It's kind of towards the bottom, but that where that would be.
Correct. So the transfer in that's identified here is the 522,000 is actually from the general fund reimbursing the enterprise fund for water that city buildings use. The transfer, it would be in the debt fund statement. One more slide. Yes. So here, the transfers in here, that is reflective of both the transfer from the enterprise fund for their operating debt and reflective of the transfers in from the impact fee funds. I can get you a total.
The reason I point that out is somebody who's a land development professional, I'll say it, I don't do any work in the city, just know about it, that the impact fees are one of the first things that developers ask for breaks on, and it's a sensitive subject. It's doable, relatively speaking, and I think we do have pressure when we're at 13 or 14% water rates. Going and giving breaks to people that want their impact fees waived does have an impact, and everybody gets to pay for that impact. Businesses, residents, things of that nature, and I do think as a body maybe we should come up with a policy on that is really clear as opposed to a case-by-case basis. I think it would give us a stronger hand in dealing with outside groups when they ask for that.
So this is when developers ask to have those fees
waived.
I don't know that we actually do waive those. I think we've had the EDC pay for
Other jurisdictions, I'm not saying that that's happening here. I'm just saying we have had requests.
Yes, we've had times where either a request or where there's a possibly, as you know, impact fee costs that somebody has to pay are based upon when they vested in that the fees that were in place at the time they platted. And so we've had individuals request to be charged a lower fee. The general rule is, excuse me, we do not waive fees. We have had instances where the EDC has, through incentive agreements, paid the impact fee or covered those costs for a new business coming to town. But generally speaking, we don't waive the fees. There have been requests to have those fees being interpreted to where they would be paying a lower fee. And we have not done that as well. We've held to a strict interpretation of the law that at the time that the property is platted, that's when it's vested. And I believe the plan is to continue to stick with that strict interpretation and recover all those revenues.
I appreciate that. I just maybe would love to have that codified at some point down the line. Obviously not during budget season, but it would be nice to have that. Can we go to the enterprise fund page 2 from the book? I just want to touch on that really quickly. I had a question mark on a gap item I couldn't identify. Excuse me. There we go. That's the page. So top line, this is budget revenues are up 4.7 million. Expenses are up 5.9 million, I guess, year over year, with 4.4 of it being an increase in debt service payments. So we do more projects, we pay more debt service as we incur the debt. There's kind of a little bit of a delta between that 1.4 and that 5.9. Do we know what the balance of that is, or what is driving that number on the expenditure piece?
So we'll look into that. A big chunk of that, I believe, is going to be the full year of operations of the surface water plant, whereas we only had a partial years of operations in FY23. But we can break that down further.
And the 4 people that we're looking to add as part of the supplemental piece, or is it 3 people? Sorry, those are 100% employees out of this fund, or are they half and half employees?
That's correct. They'll be 100% out of this fund. We will no longer be sharing employees between the EPW and utilities group. Previously, when they were one department, their employees were usually split 50-50.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? with that, any other presentation wrap up?
I believe that's it, Mayor Pro Tem. We appreciate your time today and all the great questions. I know we've got a lot of folks taking good notes, and we'll provide some feedback there. Get ramped up for our budget workshop number 2 in about a week and a half, and or Monday after this coming Monday. And if there's any final questions or anything else, we'll take those right now, and then we can wrap things up.
Member Hernandez?
I would just like to make the comment that thank you very much this year for giving me the option of not having those binders delivered and just downloading this thing. And as Member Carbone requested, once you get the raw data up there, that'd be helpful as well. But big major move. I'm greatly appreciative for that. Thank y'all.
Absolutely. And once again, I want to thank everyone here that's from our staff. They did all the hard work getting us here today, especially our budget team. So thank you, everybody. And once again, appreciate the council's time on a Saturday.
Member Patel,
Thank you guys. Great job.
Sorry, a couple of things. I apologize, I didn't talk about this during each session, but one of the things I would ask you on the finance side, I don't know how Tony feels, but I like to see percentage change. It just makes life a lot easier. It just, I don't know, maybe it's my accounting side. So if you can, maybe in the future, I would just ask something to add, just percentage showing from last year's amended budget to proposed budget, so you can kind of run down there. One of the other things I would ask for maybe future is just like the EDC does, has a 5-year budget. Maybe you can start asking your departments so we can plan better. And just kind of get a raw idea of what the 5 years request will be for expenditures and obviously estimates and revenues. And I do agree with Member Carbone. I had mentioned this to Trent earlier about the EDC. I think we need to kind of see if we can shift some of those funds or expenditures on the EDC's balance. And one thing that did concern me was the IT pool fund, that we're not at all mentioning that. I met with the director, and I understand their needs and the city's needs, and I know it's difficult. And then the CVB, I appreciate the sports complex that they're helping out, but maybe we need to kind of look at something long-term. What do we do with that $7 million? And the soccer fields, that's a sore subject. So I won't say anything on that. But anyway, I agree with the fees. I think we need to kind of tie the fees into annually increasing it based on just inflation. So thank you again for the weekend. I enjoyed it on Saturday.
Member Barry, did you have anything to say? All right. All right. Well, thank y'all very much for everybody coming out and working with us today. With that, at 11:47, meeting's adjourned.